Good evening, everybody. It's a lonely Zoom room here tonight.
Hey, Vince.
Hey, Donna.
I don't think we can start our video. It says the host has to, the host has stopped video.
Okay.
That's why you're all by yourself, Vince.
True, I got the same.
I'll troubleshoot and get that taken care of, hopefully shortly.
Great. I was wondering. It's like, man, it's a cold room tonight. This is.
Yeah.
There we go.
There
Looks
we
like
go.
we're.
Hi, Shay. Hi, Micah. Hi, Dave. Jim, Caroline, Toon. All right, great. Got Lindsay and Dave from staff. Okay.
Is Josh Schrader here yet?
Hi, Neva. I don't see Josh, Donna.
Okay, well, we'll hope
Any-
for it.
Gosh, we've got just about everyone tonight. That's great. Nice to see you all. We might as well get started here. We certainly have a quorum for the evening. Welcome everyone to the February 2nd meeting of the Missoula Consolidated Planning Board. If we could please have the roll call.
Thank you. Neva Hassanen.
Here.
Neva Hassanen's present. Toon Pham.
Here.
Toon Pham. Not in the meeting at present. Andy Mefford.
Here.
Andy Mefford's present. Sean McCoy. Sean McCoy.
All right. Aye.
Thank you, Sean. Sean McCoy is present. Dave Loomis.
Here.
Dave Loomis is present. Micah Sewell.
Here.
Micah Sewell is present. Jim Bichond.
Here.
Jim Bichond is present. Shane Morrissey.
Here.
Jane Morrissey is present. Caroline Lauer.
Present.
Caroline Lauer is present. Vince Caristo.
Present.
Vince Caristo is present. Was that Josh Schrader who came in?
It is present, but
It
late.
is. Thank you very much. Mr. Chair, there are 9 members and 2 alternates present. The alternates can participate in discussion, but cannot vote. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. Oops. Okay, next we have the approval of the minutes from the January 19th meeting. Are there any comments or revisions to the minutes? Okay, seeing none, could I have a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll move to approve the minutes as written.
Thanks, Caroline. Is there a second?
Second.
A second.
Micah seconds. All in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
All opposed? Okay, the minutes pass. Thank you, staff, for working on those. Next, we have public comment on items that are not on tonight's agenda. So if there is anyone from the public who's attending tonight, either on Zoom or on phone, and would like to make a comment, this would be the time to do so. We'll have the instructions up here on the screen. I will call you by the name that you, if you're using Zoom, I'll identify you by the name you entered while logging into Zoom. And please use the raise hand function to indicate that you'd like to speak, and I'll call on folks in the order that I see them. If you've called by phone, I will call your name by the last 4 digits of the phone number that you called with. And to raise your hand to indicate that you'd like to speak, press *9 and then *6 to unmute yourself. So we'll give a couple minutes here. I don't think I see any other, to see if anyone would like to speak. Great. So I'll go on mute, and if you'd like to talk at this time, please raise your hand in one of those ways. Okay, we have one person who's indicated they'd like to speak tonight. Looks like I've only got the last portion of your phone number, but the phone number is 1406****789. You'll have 3 minutes to speak, and the floor is yours. Please indicate your full name when you start your talk. Thank you.
Good evening. Just a point of order. We tried to look at the meeting on television, and we ended up with last night's city council meeting. My wife signed on with Zoom, and there's a delay. I'm hearing you at a slightly different pace than what's on Zoom, so I don't know what to do. Just a point of order. We tried to.
Okay, thank you for that. It seems so there is a delay with the technology that we have on YouTube and maybe Zoom as well. And it's something we've been working with for the last, almost year since we've been online. So the meetings go a little bit slower, but we give time for folks to be able to hear when it's time to speak, so that if they'd like to make it to speak, they have time to come in, call in, or enter the Zoom meeting. So that's the way we've been dealing with it. It's not ideal, but thank you for putting up with it. So thanks for bringing that to our attention. Staff, on the other comment, staff is here and has heard Donna and Heather. If there was a broken link that was sent out for
The links, the direct links to the meeting are on the city website. On the top of the agenda, it says join here. It's probably a little late to walk them through that, but I can try doing it real quick. Actually, the one on the screen, if you just type in that address that Heather has with the missoulacounty.us.go.planning board, that will get you in to the Zoom webinar.
Great, I caught that. So caller on the line, are you able to see the screen?
Yes, I see the screen. I guess I'm tempted, rather than make a lot of switches here, to just watch what you do on the screen, and then when it's time to raise my hand, just use the phone to do it, even though there's a slight, as you pointed out, a delay. But it's a little confusing, and I think some of the folks that may want to testify tonight will also find it a little bit confusing too.
Yeah, it is. So I think you've got the right idea there, and thank you for putting up with the technology, and to everyone else out there as well. Okay, moving on, I don't see anyone else who's indicated a desire to speak at this point. I think there's been plenty of time for folks to do that. So I'll give it just one final call for folks who'd like to speak, and then we'll move on. Okay, we'll close the public comment portion of the meeting and move on to staff announcements. There's one announcement tonight, that there is a new planning board member training coming up on February 9th. I think I have the date right. If any of you would like to attend, who have not already indicated, please let Donna know. There are a couple of slots open, 2 slots actually, for planning board members to attend before we meet the threshold that we'd have to notice the meeting, publicly notice the meeting. But don't let that deter you if you're interested in brushing up on planning board and the mechanics and function of the board. Please let Donna know the details to attend, and we'll figure out a way to make it work if lots of people are interested. Okay, next we have communications and special presentations. We have one tonight from Missoula County. presentation on the Missoula County Growth Policy Review from Lindsay Romaniello.
Close enough. Romanello.
Romanello, sorry, Lindsay.
Well,
I'll
no,
note for next time.
that was a beautiful effort. Yeah, thanks so much. Great. So I'm gonna share my screen here real quick. I've just got a quick presentation for you guys. Let's see. All right. Sorry, let me. And can everybody see my screen?
Yep.
Great. Okay, so yeah, I'm going to be chatting with you guys about our growth policy review, and this is something that we do every 5 years, a quinquennial event, if you will, and this is sort of a precursor to our growth policy update, and going through the growth policy review is it's part of state statute. It's also called for in our growth policy guidelines. And the purpose of this is to, just kind of evaluate and assess the growth policy and how it's working, and if and what would need to be updated. This evaluation is just kind of a good check-in for us to see our progress and if changes need to get made. And so there are, and also part of the growth policy guidelines, there are 6 factors that we evaluate this on, that we're thinking about. The first one is change to legal framework. If anything at the state, federal, local level has changed that would make it so that we have to update or change our policy. The second one is a change in, kind of a drastic change in conditions or projected trends, something that really alters what the growth policy has called for. The third one is degree to which goals and objectives have been met. So in our growth policy, we've got a set of goals, objectives, and action items, and we just kind of want to see where we're at with those. Fourth, any deviation from the implementation timeline. The growth policy has a loose timeline, and we just need to see where we're at. The fifth one is if there's been any major input or suggestions of changes from public or stakeholders. And the final one is just if there's any way that we can improve the growth policy's usefulness. And so these are how we've been looking, the framework from which we are looking at the growth policy to inform any updates. So I'm going to go into these in a little bit of detail. The first one, change in legal framework, nothing. So we can move on. But that we are keeping an eye on the legislative session, seeing what comes up, if anything. But as of yet, we haven't seen anything that has changed how we will implement or use this growth policy. So we'll move on to the next one. Change to conditions and projected trends. And so for this, many of the conditions and projected trends aren't vastly different, but we have seen quite a few changes, especially in the last year. This is based on kind of a couple factors. And then we've also had a considerable amount of research. We've kind of been doing a lot of good fact building and research, kind of understanding our current times and conditions. And so, we can do some updates based on those. And some of those, we have more information about environmental conditions, climate change related. We also have more information about kind of wildfires and specifically wild urban interface. So we've got more information about that. And then, of course, the stuff that's most prominent and prevalent to most of us, kind of population and economic projections. We do have more information regarding those. So, we've had a lot of update concerning housing data and challenges with affordable housing. We also have the 2020 census that's about to come out. So we're going to see some new numbers there and be able to possibly update based on those. And then, of course, economic changes based, coming from the COVID-19 pandemic. So these are things that we see that we could possibly update our growth policy with. And then also, we've done an evaluation of all the maps and figures in the growth policy. And there have been some minor, changes in data that we could go through and update some of those figures. So that wraps up that one. Moving on to the third, the degree to which goals and objectives have been met. Overall, we have been making progress on some of these, but there's kind of one big thing that we're missing that we've made some progress on, and that's the land use strategy, and that includes kind of updating land use designations. With the land use element, we did do some great updating in the Valley area, which was kind of the most critical part of this, but we would like to expand those to the whole county, and so that is missing from meeting these goals and objectives. We would also we haven't done a large evaluation and updating of our area plans, which we would like to do, and that is also called for in the growth policy. And then updating and expanding, possibly expanding the zoning code map. And that we are currently working on. But that is another thing that has not been met according to our growth policy. All right, so the next one, deviation from timetable. Now, for this, we haven't, deviated too drastically, despite, kind of the larger goals that we haven't quite implemented. But there was sort of a challenge in our growth policy where the timetable is a little bit vague. We don't really have a great set of priorities, really laid out for how we're going to address our major goals and objectives. So, those are a little bit vague, and this is especially prevalent in the action items that are listed in our growth policy. A lot of them are kind of considered ongoing, and those ones can be a little bit vague. For example, some of our action items would be working with partners to develop a better park system. Well, that's great. We definitely want to do that and keep that in mind, but it's not particularly helpful. And we've got quite a few of those in our timetable. And so it would be beneficial to, kind of reorganize and reprioritize some of those actions and objectives. So then moving on to our next category. Public stakeholder input and suggested changes. We haven't heard of anything that any stakeholders or public saying that our growth policy is wrong or that they want specific changes, but we have done a lot of really great recent outreach efforts that has given us a lot of good information that would help us in that sort of reprioritization. Just to name a couple, for example, the Missoula County Values Survey, the Swatup Master Plan, and Climate Ready Missoula, all were, these really intensive, really great outreach efforts that gave us a pretty good, just a more expanded idea on some of the value of, on some of the values here in the Missoula County. So that would be, you know, kind of a good information to help us with our update. All right, and then moving right along here, just generally, you know, how can we improve the growth policy's usefulness? This, you know, it kind of touches on a lot of what I've already talked about, you know, kind of a reprioritization of the values and objectives. You know, the growth policy really, it did capture values and objectives, especially in the rural areas. But, you know, again, it didn't do a great job of really giving a good prioritization list of that. And then another thing that would make this more useful, area plans, really rethink it, because we haven't been able to get to the updates of those, and they are really important. We kind of need to rethink how we do that so that those can be useful. So, you know, rethinking the functionality and kind of coming up with a good strategy to maintain and develop and implement those plans. That would be kind of a useful thing that we could do. And then finally, something that, you know, we would very much like to work on is expand the land use and land use designation maps to the whole county. And that would also, you know, be able to really help us utilize and use the growth policy. So yeah, in summary, you know, this is kind of what we've talked about, updates to projections and trends based on environmental data, and climate change, wildlife, all that good data that we've collected over the last few years. Updating the growth policy on, you know, kind of population and economic changes and growth trend. We could also, you know, in this update, revisit, you know, our progress on the land use strategy and really expand that. Clarifying, you know, our timetable and our priorities and goals. And then update those goals and objectives to reflect the public input that we've gathered recently. Reprioritize our values and objectives. Rethink our the area plans and their functionality. And complete our land use map. So those are our goals for, you know, our growth policy. And based on this evaluation, this is what we would like to accomplish. Now, what exactly of this we can accomplish is based on, you know, kind of staff and time. You know, while we will do our best, you know, kind of and these are our sort of our lofty goals. If we had all the time and money in the world, we'd love to accomplish these as soon and as fast as possible. And we will, you know, in the meantime, kind of see which ones we get to. So next steps. We are actively, you know, kind of working on this scope of work. Right now we're currently working quite a bit on the zoning code updates. So this is getting pushed off a little, but this is something that we have. So we would like to, you know, come up with a scope of work for our growth policy update. And then after that, you know, really bring in all of the great data that we have collected and do some really useful research, especially with new census data. And then that would sort of facilitate this larger growth policy update, and we would add to and alter our growth policy to better help us out and reflect what we would like. So that's kind of all for me. I can stop sharing, possibly. Great. Yeah, and any questions?
Thank you for that, Lindsay. That was really nice. And it's great to learn a new word every once in a while.
I know. I saw that one too. I was like, I've got to add this.
Are there any questions for Lindsay?
I have
Neva.
a comment, or just a I would encourage you guys to focus on that land use strategy piece and expanding it out as because like you said, that was a long list of goals, and expanding that kind of work out further into the county makes a lot of sense as a next step. In addition to some of those other things like updating data and so on, but still, but I know that's a big undertaking as well, but I'll just make a pitch for that.
Yeah, absolutely. That is definitely a top part of our list, and we are very interested in doing that as well. Oh, was that me? I don't think so. Oh.
Are you sharing your screen with us? No, you're not intending to? Okay, let's see. Okay.
That was weird. Sorry, I thought that
We're
was
back.
Yeah, any other questions?
Lindsay, what's the timetable for on the last slide? Or is this?
Yeah, that's a great question. So again, we are definitely full blown into the zoning code update right now. My guess is that this will, we'll start revisiting this kind of summer, fall. Yeah, we should be able to get back to a scope of work. No promises, but we're hoping that's our goal. And then we'll get back into this kind of by mid to late this year.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for the presentation, Lindsay.
Yeah, happy to do it. Thanks, guys.
And good luck.
Appreciate you.
Okay, next. We have one public hearing tonight on the McNett Flats major subdivision. It'll be presented by Dave DeGrandprix and Emily Gluckin of the City of Missoula Community Planning, Development, and Innovation Department. So Dave and Emily, please take it away.
All right, thanks, Vince. I'm going to share my screen. Good evening, board members, and thanks for the opportunity to talk with you tonight. We're going to move now from the big picture of growth policy planning to the site-specific scale. And I'm hoping you can see my screen. Can you see the McNett Flats major subdivision slide?
We could, it just went black.
Emily, I wonder if, my internet's been a little funky lately. I wonder if I could stop sharing my screen, Emily, and you could try it.
Sure. Yeah, give me a second. I'll bring it up.
Okay. Apologize for the delay, everyone.
Can you all see that?
Yep.
Okay.
Excellent. Thanks, Emily.
Yep.
Well, again, good evening, board members, and thanks for the opportunity to help facilitate your review and public hearing and discussion and recommendation on McNett Flats major subdivision. Next screen, please, Emily. So I want to start with a little bit of context and background for the project. The subject property, it's 20 acres in size. It's located in an area that's developing quite quickly. You can see Mullen Road to the south. East or West Broadway is located in the top right-hand corner. The airport's just off the screen in the upper left-hand corner. To the immediate south of the property are a couple of developments that are quickly building out. You've got the Flynn Ranch directly to the south and a portion of the 44 Ranch as well. Since this aerial photo was taken, a number of new homes, maybe I'm sure more than a dozen new homes have been built in the 44 Ranch to the southwest of this of the subject property as well. Immediately to the west is the Remington Flats subdivision. I think most of you planning board members were here for the review. That was back in October when the planning board heard it. It's 152 residential lots to be developed in 7 phases. And then south of the existing development is a project called Heron's Landing. That's 347 different lots to be developed over 10 phases in a roughly 20-year time period. So you can see that that's a lot's happening in this area. George Elmer Drive, which is right in the middle, that's a major north-south collector road that's partially been constructed and is planned to continue as part of the Mullen build project up through the subject property and eventually connecting with England Boulevard, which, if you see the word subject property, it's just to the right of the Y in property. That's the future alignment for England Boulevard. So there's quite a bit of planning. I'm sure most of you are aware in this area that's happening. It's really the city, it's the growth area for the city. And so in any event, wanted to provide you with a little context there. Next slide, please, Emily. So this is a little bit of housekeeping and maybe to orient the board members a little bit in terms of where we are in the process in your role. So there are a number of moving parts to a project like this. In this case, the property is currently within the county. It's not within the city limits, but it's proposed to be annexed, or it's in process of being annexed and initially zoned within the city of Missoula. It's a multi-step process. The city council first adopts a resolution of intent to annex the property and to zone it. Council did that on the 25th of January. So that's already in the works. And council, the planning board does not have a role in the annexation and initial zoning of the property, but you do have a substantial and important role in the subdivision review. And that's what we'll be focusing on tonight. And the board, again, holds a public hearing, adopts findings of facts, and makes recommendations on subdivision proposals. And then I'm sure this will come up, so I want to discuss it right off the bat. So the way that Montana law is laid out for subdivisions, there has to be there's kind of a grandfather clause. And when an application, there are multiple steps before it gets to you, planning board members. There are a number of steps that the applicant goes through. There's a pre-application stage, then the developer submits the application and it goes through a kind of a checklist or element review. Then it goes through a review for sufficiency. Is the application detailed enough? Does it contain enough supporting information to review it and to understand whether it complies with the rules, whether it doesn't? So once the application is deemed sufficient, then the rules that are in effect at that time are the rules that apply. And so the application for the McNett Flat subdivision was deemed sufficient prior to the Setupcane plan, the Mullen master plan, being adopted and going into effect. So the rules, so it's the standard Missoula Title 20, standard subdivision regulations that are in effect for this project. Next slide, please. So here's the property. This is kind of an existing conditions map and just a few things I'd like to go over. The topography is pretty mild. You can see, though, there are some contour lines. That's where a branch of Grant Creek once flowed. It was rerouted back in, I think it was the 1950s. You can even see it on some old United States Geological Survey quadrangle maps, but it's no longer there. So the property is fairly mild in topography. It does have a few existing items along the west boundary and the south boundary on the left-hand side or the west side. There's an existing 60-foot public road and private road and public utility easement. And that provides, or has historically provided, access to properties to the north. So that's there, it's in effect today. Right up the center of the property is an 80-foot dedicated right-of-way for George Elmer Drive. So that was dedicated several years ago. And again, George Elmer is intended to be a main north-south corridor between Mullen and Broadway. And so that's in place. And then along the right-hand side of the eastern property boundary is an existing irrigation ditch that has historically provided irrigation water to this property and also properties to the north. Next slide, please. And so here is the preliminary plat, or what is on the table for you tonight. So it consists of 7 lots. The lots range in size from 1.15 acres to 3.12 acres. You can see that George Elmer Drive, again, that collector road or that main north-south corridor runs right up the middle of it. The streets to the left-hand side of the west, Winchester Drive and Remington Drive, those are aligned like this to tie in to the Remington Flats subdivision that's directly to the west of this. So to connect to that. And then Old Ranch Road, which is the north-south road to the right, that is set to align with the existing Old Ranch Road through the Flynn Ranch subdivision and also continue to the north. And then Abbey Lane, the east-west road through the center, that will continue on. We don't have any development applications on property to the east, but the idea is to align the roads with existing and planned roads to provide connectivity and to result in less traffic congestion at any one point to be able to disperse traffic over time. All of the streets are designed with landscape boulevards, with sidewalks, pedestrian facilities that would tie into existing development. Let's see. Oh, and along George Elmer Drive, one more note on, I mentioned that there's an 80-foot right-of-way along that road. It's already in place. The city's requested and the developer has offered to provide an additional 5 feet of easement, access and utility easement, running up on both sides of that road, just in case additional room is needed in the future. Next slide, please. So under Montana subdivision law and also our local regulations, we have specific criteria with which to evaluate subdivision proposals. And these are the main criteria, the primary criteria. There are others like compliance with survey requirements and providing legal and physical access to lots and things like that. But I'm going to focus on these a little bit. And the one I'm going to focus on most is, all of these are detailed in your staff report. So, but I don't want to, this is a pretty long presentation as it is, and I know a lot of people want to speak. So I'm going to go through some of this relatively quickly, but one thing I really want to focus on is compliance with the growth policy. So Emily. So during previous subdivision reviews throughout the fall and winter, I've emphasized this future land use map, and this is from the growth policy. And so the city of Missoula, our Missoula growth policy, it provides guidance. It guides how the city intends to grow and develop over time, how it intends to meet its challenges for things like affordable housing, environmental protection, and creating great places, and lots of, includes lots of things like goals and objectives that Lindsay was talking about in the last presentation. But one of the things that's most critical in the growth policy is the future land use map. And this is an excerpt of the future land use map. And you can see directly to the south of the property is located in the center, it's hatched. And located to the south of that is a designation called residential medium. And so that it's set up to provide for development that's between typically 3 and 11 dwelling units per acre. Different styles of development, but it can be anything from single family type residential homes up to smaller multifamily attached structures, 3 and 4 unit structures, things like that. So that was what was decided would be best suited for area to the south and the west. On this property and the property to the north and surrounding it, the orange color, that's neighborhood mixed use. And you'll notice that there's also a kind of a quasi circle. Not sure what to call it, what that shape's called exactly, but in any event, that's an area that denotes a node of development. And we're going to get into what these things mean here on the next slide. Go ahead, Emily. So under the growth policy, neighborhood mixed use is intended to, kind of like it sounds, it's intended to provide focal point for neighborhoods. And in this case, it's an existing neighborhood, but also a quickly growing neighborhood. And it's intended to include lots of different types of development. So neighborhood scale, retail, offices, entertainment, might be eating and drinking establishments, professional services, things like that. And also encouraged within this land use designation or this category is high density residential development. And that's kind of further buffeted by the presence of this node development. And nodes are located along really major transportation corridors. And that node designation was included on this property in particular, and the one to the north of it on that map that we just showed you, because it's located along George Elmer Drive. And so it kind of further buffets the neighborhood mixed use designation by really seeking to concentrate pedestrian friendly type development, residential and smaller scale commercial in one area, provide community gathering places, area where transit might be available and might be economical and efficient to provide. and things like that, and a real integration of uses. So it gives you a little bit of context. And the reason that this future land use map is so important, because, you know, when looking at the text of the growth policy, it says essentially that the land use map is a distillation of all the different goals and objectives that are provided in the growth policy. It seeks to take all of the kind of public goods, so to speak, that are talked about in the growth policy, all the things that we'd like to accomplish, and put them on a map, provide a geographic guide for the types of growth and development that are to occur in specific areas. So it really is what the growth policy, in my opinion, it kind of boils down to in the end. Next slide, please. But growth policies, as you know, also contain policy statements. It's not only the map. And so I wanted to kind of bring these to your attention a little bit. They're not detailed in the staff report, but they're certainly in the growth policy, and we at the staff level have been considering them when we evaluated this project and also other projects. And some of the policy statements that apply to this are come from the livability chapter and the housing chapter. So it's seeking to balance the amount of green spaces with developments, while providing adequate access to recreational facilities and opportunities. The housing chapter is very strong in talking about increasing different types of housing, also putting more dense housing near multimodal transportation networks, developing sidewalks, bike lanes, transit, things like that. Next, please. And the housing chapter, as I mentioned, when the growth policy was adopted back in 2015, Missoula was already really facing a affordable housing, I don't know if crisis is the right word, but certainly challenge. And so the growth policy is strong in saying that there has to be a sufficient supply of housing and a variety of housing types. And then also the last bullet, I think, is really pointed toward planning board members and our elected officials at council. So cultivating leadership, you know, these decisions are hard. So it's important to cultivate leadership to support rezoning of land to allow for multifamily units in appropriate areas. So obviously not everywhere, but where the map dictates that it might be appropriate. Next, please. And then this is an excerpt from, or 3 bullet points from the city's housing policy. It's called A Place to Call Home. And it talks about housing equity, and that the majority of the growth in Missoula has been historically supported by a small number of neighborhoods that are zoned for higher density. But every neighborhood, and you're familiar with this, I'm sure, every neighborhood should participate in addressing the housing issues. And so housing affordability is deeply tied to achieving more compact development patterns than single family zones allow. That's not to say that single family zones are bad in any way, but that there needs to be, in order to really tackle this housing crisis or challenge head on, we need to have some different types of housing as well in appropriate areas. Next, please. And then we'll go through this here pretty quickly, but I wanted to point out to you, board members, that the county has been thinking about this type of growth and development in this area as well. It's not isolated to the city. So this is a map that comes from the 2019 Missoula County land use element. And so this is an update or an addendum to the growth policy. And what you can see the subject property in the center, and what they've planned for this area as well is community mixed use, just like the county had. Next, please. And community mixed use, this designation, is very similar to the city's. It's a mix of residential, commercial, and civic activity, opportunities for retail, service, employment, and higher intensity residential choices that contribute to housing diversity. You can see on the map to the right, it's only in specific locations that this designation was deemed appropriate, but where this project is, McDuck Flats is certainly one. So again, just wanted to point out to you that the city and the county are pretty aligned when it comes to the type of land use that would be most beneficial in this area. Next, please. And then looking at the zoning as it is today, the zoning on the property today, you can see it's outlined in blue, it's called County Rural Residential 1, CRR1. And that's kind of a transitional district. It anticipates that land uses are going to change over time. It provides a density of 1 dwelling unit per acre. And the text of the zoning essentially says, we know it specifically calls it a transitional area. So it's kind of a holding type district, I think. And you can see immediately to the west, That area was annexed. That's Remington Flats. It was annexed into the city recently. You reviewed it. The board reviewed it as a subdivision, and it now has city density of RT 5.4 with a neighborhood character overlay. Immediately to the south, the 44 Ranch and the Flynn Ranch districts were created specifically for those developments. Next, please. And then this is the zoning that's under consideration by the city council right now. I mentioned they adopted a resolution of intent on the 25th. B22, it's a neighborhood commercial, community commercial type district. It provides a lot of different uses. It provides for all types of residential uses, ranging from single family type structures, single dwelling structures, up to multi-dwelling structures. It's more intensive. It's a more intensive district than what's to the south or to the west for that matter. It provides lots of different types of commercial development, residential development, and it has building heights up to 50 feet in height. I think the districts to the south, the maximum building heights are 35 feet in those, I believe. So it could provide certainly for a change in development type as planned by the city and the county. Next, please. So then moving on, I'll try to be pretty brief. I think the staff report lays these out in some detail, describes the conditions and our evaluation, but I don't want to give them short shrift either. There are prime soils on the property. There are irrigation facilities on the property as well, and also irrigation water runs through the property, 2 properties to the north. The developer has proposed to provide to culvert a portion of the ditch, provide a ditch easement so that it can be maintained over time with approval from the irrigation ditch company, and also to continue to provide agricultural water or irrigation water to properties to the north. In terms of, and there are no existing water rights on the property. In terms of the natural environment, wildlife and wildlife habitat, the property does serve as habitat certainly for local species. You know, I'm sure there are fox, there are skunks, there are lots of bird species that inhabit the area, rodents and things like that. You know, it's part of it's undeveloped, historically agricultural land. But there are no wetlands, no water bodies, no critical plant communities that we've been able to determine, or critical wildlife habitat. We were a little bit concerned at the staff level in this area with high groundwater and whether there might be impacts of contamination, or whether if sumps were used to catch runoff, whether they might impact basements if they were built on the property, or if they might flood basements, or if they might have other deleterious impacts. And so the developer completed a hydrologic evaluation at our request, and essentially the findings or the summary is no significant impacts are anticipated on the natural environment as proposed. With regard to public health and safety, that's always one of our biggest criteria. We take it quite seriously, of course. You know, when we look at things like circulation systems, and so the developers providing legal and physical access to all of the lots. There's city water, city sewer, city fire has preliminarily approved a fire hydrant plan. Didn't receive any comments from police or emergency medical, but there are no natural hazards that we're aware of on the property. A sliver of the property in the northeast corner is in an airport influence area, and so that's addressed in one of the conditions. Okay, Emily. So I talked a little bit about the local services and access. A couple of points to note. One, George Elmer Drive is a Mullen Build project street. And so that's being funded in part, improvements are being funded in part by grant monies. And there are also some other mechanisms the city's considering, an impact fee in particular, to help build out that project. George Elmer Drive is supposed to, it intersects with Mullen to the south. The traffic congestion is already an issue and will only get worse if improvements aren't made, because more development is coming online all the time. Improvements to the intersection are planned to start construction this year. And so that would be a roundabout. I just looked at the plans here tonight before the meeting. A big roundabout is planned at that intersection to help move traffic along more quickly. And connections to the north that would end up tying in with England Boulevard are hoped to be built over the next few years. Funding is still an issue. The city and county are trying to work through that together, but plans are at 90%. 90% of the engineering has been completed. And so the city and county are looking for funding right now for those improvements. There are other improvements in the area. Just to the south of the subdivision is within the Flynn Ranch 44 Ranch neighborhood is a proposed or intended roundabout, and that project is also expected to get started either this year or next year. The city's looking for an engineer to do final design right now. So lots going on in terms of transportation improvements in the area. I mentioned sidewalks. One thing I did want to point out that I haven't talked about much is the Mullen Build Grant has a trail called Tipperary Trail that is intended to come from Mullen all the way up north through the existing subdivisions, and right at it comes up George Elmer, and then right at the southern boundary of this property, I'll show you a graphic here in a minute, but is intended to go east. And so that's part of the Mullen Build Grant project, although the developer has been requested and has agreed to provide a segment of that trail along the southern boundary. So that's a 10-foot wide paved trail within a significant easement that would be used by the public. Go ahead, Emily. Talked about city fire and police a little bit. I'll talk about city parks here in just a minute in the parkland proposal. So schools is always an issue. It has been an issue in each of the projects that we reviewed in this area. The application, it talks about different types of land uses. It talks about the mixture of land uses. It also kind of looks at a potential, I'll say in quotes, worst case scenario of all residential development and up to potentially as high as 650 residential units. And I think they use that for a couple of reasons. One, I think that the developer, that's what the developer's historically done, is multifamily, but also residential homes tend to generate a number of trips. Oftentimes a detached dwelling is estimated to generate about 9.5, 10 vehicle trips per day. So they use that. It's a conservative or a high number that's used to look at traffic impacts and figure out what improvements would be made. But in any event, the school-age children, we reached out to the school district representatives and haven't heard back any comments. That's in my experience not unusual. We often don't hear back from school district representatives, but I just wanted to point that out to you. Next slide, please. And then parkland. So this is the Tipperary Way Trail this is along the southern boundary of the property on lots 5 and lot 4. An existing city street called Pius Way is located to the south, and the developer, as I mentioned, would build this 10-foot wide asphalt trail. Closer to the street, there'd be a 7-foot boulevard it would be landscaped with street trees, and the developer has proposed the easement that's been requested by city officials. Along this stretch of road, this doesn't have, well, I'll get to that in a minute here. So the developers proposed a couple of options to meet the parkland dedication requirement. And as you may know, when residential development is proposed, or when development is proposed that could turn out to be residential, is in this case, the city requires parkland dedication, and that can either be land or it can be cash in lieu of land or instead of land. In this case, the developer proposed a couple of options. One is cash in lieu of 2.92 acres and dedication of that trail easement that I mentioned, or cash in lieu of half the parkland, and then half would be platted along the trail, essentially just north of it on lots 5 and lot 4. And that is what's recommended by the city. One of the reasons that we're not recommending parkland throughout on the west side as well is the west side of the subdivision is within the 44 Ranch, it's within the service area of the 44 Ranch Park. So that was seen as sufficient by Missoula Parks and Rec, but they were looking for some parkland on the east side of George Elmer, and that's what staff's recommending here. Okay, Emily. So there are 6 variances that are requested, and I'm going to go through them in some brevity, but obviously we can talk about them if and when you would like. So the first is city subdivision regulations for an urban collector roadway require a 90-foot wide right-of-way, and George Elmer Drive, the main north-south thoroughfare, already has an 80-foot right-of-way. It was dedicated years ago, and so the developer would like to keep that right-of-way. Is proposing to build a road that meets all of our standards for urban collectors in terms of the drive lanes, parking lanes, the boulevard, sidewalk, etc. but within an 80-foot right-of-way. And we did that in the Heron's Landing subdivision along the same stretch of road, not just less than a quarter of a mile to the south. And so staff is recommending approval because of the existence of the right-of-way, because of the history, to be consistent with our decision-making and that sort of thing, and also because the improvements can fit within the proposed 80 feet. And then finally, I mentioned earlier, the developer is proposing to dedicate additional 5-foot easements on both sides of the road in case improvements are needed or additional width is needed at some point in the future. Next, Emily. The developer is proposing to have 64-foot wide rights of way for the urban local streets, and our subdivision regulations require 80. And so these are for Old Ranch Road, Winchester, Briar, Remington, and Abbey. The rationale is, again, the streets meeting the urban local standard can be built within 64 feet. It actually provides a little bit. In Heron's Landing, I think they only had 60 feet. They're looking for, in Remington Flats, just to the west, it's 64, and the developer here is proposing 64. So again, we're looking at consistency. It can be done physically, and there isn't really a need for additional space. And so we figured it's better that the space goes toward providing housing than providing kind of unused right-of-way that may or may, or at least that may or may not be used in the future. Again, all of the specifications for drive lanes, parking lanes, boulevards, sidewalks can be met within that right-of-way. So we're recommending approval. Next. And then variances 4 and 5 have to do with block length. Our subdivision regulations say that blocks can't exceed 480 feet in length. And so lot 1 to the north, lot 6 to the south, they exceed that. And part of it is because, well, I think the reason is Winchester Drive, which travels west to the north, and Remington, which travels west to the south, are set to align with the roads in the Remington Flats subdivision. This is the exact alignment. And so it creates a funky circumstance, I guess. I suppose it's possible that the developer could have continued the north-south segment of that road immediately to the north, couldn't connect it to anything to the south, but in any event, it matches up with development that's proposed to the west, or it's been approved to the west. And in terms of the reason to have block length maximums is to provide enough space where people can walk, essentially get from point A to point B, not create these long blocks that just go on and on and on, but to break it up a little bit to provide cross streets and things like that. In this case, the developer is proposing 10-foot pedestrian easements. You see one to the north and one to the south that would connect. To the south, it would connect to an alley in the 44 Ranch subdivision. To the north, it would connect to the adjoining property, which we haven't seen any development applications on yet, but could incorporate that easement into a pedestrian type facility as well. So again, staff's recommending approval based on the existence of the streets, Winchester Drive and Remington Drive, and the mitigation proposed by the development. And then finally, variance number 6. And this has to do with the existing street to the south of the property. It's called Pius Way. And I talked about it a little bit earlier. Right now, well, it has a 54, it was approved in Flynn Ranch subdivision with a 54-foot wide right-of-way. And the developer is not proposing to increase the right-of-way, but the developer is proposing to, I think, it substantially improve the street. And our subdivision regulations state that when access from an existing city street is going to be provided, the developer has to essentially bring that all the way up to current street standards. In this case, the developer is proposing not to increase the right-of-way, but to provide additional space for parking, drainage, and then to provide landscape buffers, and then provide for that separated 10-foot wide pathway along the north side. So staff is recommending approval of that as well. Next slide, please. I'm almost done, I promise. There are 26 conditions of approval that are recommended. Probably don't need to go through all of these. You see them in your staff report, but they're intended to address the issues that were brought up in the report, having to do with agriculture and agricultural water user facilities, participation in road improvements, providing city water, sewer, hydrants, sidewalks, the 10-foot trail, parkland, things like that. So I think that maybe that's enough for now. If you want to delve into the conditions a little deeper, we certainly can. Emily? And then we can probably roll through these tonight, or right now, but we have recommended motions for the planning board's consideration that we can come back to when the time comes, but their approval of the variances. So why don't you skip ahead, Emily? Variances 1 through 6, and then approval of the preliminary plat of the subdivision. Again, your role is to make a recommendation on the variances and the subdivision application itself, to hold a public hearing. And then speaking of public hearings, one more slide, Emily. So we have received a lot of public comments, and you'll hear many tonight, I'm sure. You know, what we've heard more than anything, I think, has to do with compatibility of people's expectations that the development to the south development pattern would continue to the north. That there would be single family type or duplex type residential development, and not commercial, not potentially apartments, things like that. Also, people are concerned about traffic, already feeling that the traffic impacts are significant from the development. There are dangerous intersections already, and concerned about the timing of improvements. Old Ranch Road, it's an existing road to the south and a 60-foot right of way. Our Old Ranch Road on this project would continue into that. I think that's a surprise probably to some people, that the city would request connectivity like that, and other things like snow storage, wildlife displacement, and things along those lines. So those are some of the comments. They're available to you. I'm sure you've read them, but in any event, and we'll hear from the public here shortly. So that concludes the presentation for right now. Emily and I are certainly here to answer any questions that you have. Yeah, but why don't we stop sharing the screen?
Great, thank you very much, Dave and Emily. That was a very informative presentation. And do we have Dave, you mentioned there's a presentation from the developer as well?
Yeah, I believe so, yes.
Okay, so if there is a representative of the developer here who has arranged to make a presentation, looks like Matt Hammerstein.
Yep, I'm on. And then also Cody Swartz and Spencer Woyth with us here at Woyth Engineering are on as well.
Okay, great.
See them there. We do have a presentation here. Let me get my screen shared.
We'll try and keep this quick and not touch on too much of the stuff that Dave and Emily just touched on. So
let me know when you can see my screen.
Yeah, looks good, Matt. Thanks.
Okay, my name is Spencer Woyth with Woyth Engineering. And again, like Cody said, we're going to keep this brief because we don't want to repeat too much. But the area that we're talking about, as Dave mentioned, McNeck Flats is directly north of, you go to the next slide now. It's directly to the north of the Glen Ranch and 44 Ranch subdivisions. A few things that we wanted to talk about in the area is there are developments continuing, as Dave mentioned, and there are going to be roadway improvements that were part of the build grant, including roundabout on George Elmer and Mullen, and another roundabout at the intersection of George Elmer and England Boulevard. As part of when the application was made for the build grant and the city did it, it was to take care of some of these traffic concerns. The grant didn't come in with the full amount, but the city has taken some options on prioritizing what they feel like is the best route to spend the money that they did receive. And these are two of the areas that the city is moving forward with on the build grant. We have been working with the city and the city's consultant on making sure that everything we design is matching up with what they're looking at for the build grant, to try and make this project as seamless as possible with multiple different entities working on it at the same time. Next slide. So developer information, so Tolson Properties, locally based builder in Missoula Valley, has built a number of different projects throughout the community, from commercial to single family, townhouses, and multifamily. Has a variety of projects that he's constructed over the years here. Next slide. So I won't get too detailed on this, but again, it's just a repetitive slide that was very similar to what Dave showed. The city Missoula growth policy You can see where the area where it was highlighted and where the node is for the mixed use type and slightly higher density residential development. And again, to reiterate, we are operating under this zoning code. We are not operating under the form-based code. So everything will refer back to this original growth policy. Next slide.
So like I said, my name is Matt Hammerstein. I'm one of our civil engineers here at Woif Engineering. So, a subdivision like this, it requires a pretty substantial amount of infrastructure planning to actually design those roadways that Dave touched on to serve the lots in McNett Flats. So just wanted to take the time to briefly walk the board through some of the design elements that we've put into this project. As Dave touched on, subdivision includes 7 lots. Those are zoned B2-2, community business, and it's bisected by George Elmer Drive, which runs north to south, kind of through the middle, you can see there. Includes the design of those public right-of-ways and construction of the streets, sidewalks, bike paths, landscaping in the boulevards, and the utilities. There's an average lot size of 2.19 acres, median lot size of 2.67 acres, and it totals out to 15.35 acres of developable lots. So the maximum allowable density based on the area of those lots would be 33 dwelling units per acre. And that kind of depends on the future land uses that end up being built within the subdivision. The B2-2 zoning allows for a variety of potential future land uses, and that just kind of maintains some flexibility for the developer to allow the projects to maintain flexibility to meet market needs in the future. So you can see kind of the layout of the roads. Dave touched on this pretty well. George Elmer Drive and then a northward extension of Old Ranch Road are the primary north to south roadways. And then Abbey Lane is a main east-west roadway, and it will connect to Remington Drive and Winchester Drive on the west boundary there. And those are aligned with the roads in the Remington Flats subdivision to the west. And then Pius Way, there's some improvements to that roadway. It exists right now, and those are associated with this project. And that you can see that along the southern boundary, headed to the east there on the map. So those proposed roadways, George Elmer Drive, it's an urban collector road, and it has an existing 80-foot right-of-way across the property. We are proposing additional 5-foot access easements on each side of that right-of-way, and I'll touch on that a little bit more later. George Elmer Drive will have 2 travel lanes, parallel parking on both sides, landscape boulevards, and bike paths on both sides, in addition to the sidewalks. You can see on the rendering there, we're kind of separating those bike lanes out from the vehicular traffic. A lot of places in the city, you see those, they're kind of in between that parking lane and the travel lane. And so taking those and moving them outside of the curb line, it kind of helps eliminate issues with people parking in the bike lanes. It keeps them accessible to cyclists, and it'll improve safety to cyclists by keeping them away from that vehicle traffic. And so like I mentioned previously, there's an existing right-of-way for George Elmer Drive, but the developer is proposing an additional 5-foot width on each side of that right-of-way. And that's kind of just a public access and utility easement, both for maintenance of the sidewalks, bike lanes, whatever the city needs, and then any additional utilities if the city determines those are needed in the future. The local streets, basically every street that's not George Elmer Drive in the subdivision, those will have a 64-foot right-of-way, kind of to match the development to the west, Remington Flats, and that'll include 2 travel lanes, parking on both sides again, landscape boulevards, and sidewalks. You can also see in the rendering there, all the intersections in the project will have kind of a curb bulb out where that parking lane gets tapered off when you come into the intersection. That's something, it's kind of new. You don't see it too many places throughout the city yet, but those serve 2 purposes. There's a stormwater element to those, which I'll touch on a little bit later. And they also calm the traffic coming to that intersection. It kind of mentally forces people to slow down, and it adds a layer of safety for pedestrians and cyclists moving throughout the development. And so like Dave touched on, the developer also will widen Pius Way, kind of just to bring that up to the current city standards for travel lanes and parking. So closely intertwined with the design of those roadways, the actual physical roadway, is the analysis of the traffic that's going to use those roadways. And we did have a traffic impact study for this project. It was prepared by Bob Ablin of Ablin Traffic Services, and he's actually on the line tonight for just any additional questions that may arise later. So it's determined in that study that the maximum possible daily trips from the subdivision is 3,590 trips. And that's determined using the maximum units that could be permitted based on the area of the lots. The reason we do that is it kind of provides a true maximum impact when those exact uses aren't known. And it lets us evaluate kind of a worst case, you would say, of the impacts to the transportation infrastructure in the area. So like I said, the primary access is via George Elmer Drive, and that's actually included in the Mullen Build Grant improvements. And we'll touch on the specifics of those a little bit later, but those Mullen Build Grant improvements are expected to provide pretty substantial transportation improvements in the vicinity of this project. You can see them a little bit on the map there: England Boulevard, a roundabout at England Boulevard and George Elmer Drive, and a roundabout at George Elmer Drive and Mullen Road to the south. That roundabout at Mullen Road and George Elmer Drive, it's kind of been one of the big community concerns, both with this project, McNett Flats, but also with other proposed developments and a lot of this activity that's happening out there. The traffic at that intersection has been a pretty big public concern. And that was actually prioritized in the build grant funding to be improved sometime in the next 2 construction seasons. In addition to that roundabout, the traffic impact study identified that McNett Flats impacts the intersection of George Elmer Drive and Cattle Drive. If you can see my cursor, it's this circle right here. That's the main entrance right now to Flynn Ranch and 44 Ranch subdivisions. And an upgrade of that intersection to a roundabout is actually also in design, and that's a city project. So then looking a little bit longer term, there's plans for George Elmer Drive to connect to West Broadway near the airport. That's also included in the build grant, but funding for that portion north of England Boulevard has not been secured. As far as public transit goes in the area, we reached out to Mountain Line on this project, and we also petitioned to join the Urban Transportation District. And they do support planning for future transit along George Elmer Drive, but it's kind of just the population out there is not sufficient yet for that efficient provision of service. So just to expand on the Mullen Build Grant, touched on it a little bit earlier in the presentation, but a little bit more detail kind of straight from the horse's mouth in the Mullen Build Grant website. So it's a concurrent project that's by the city of Missoula, and it's being designed by DJ&A. They're another local surveying and civil engineering firm. And it's going to provide some transportation improvements out in that area to support some of these projects that are coming online. You can see on the map there, the blue projects have funding secured, and those are scheduled for completion by the end of 2022. So we're a little bit less than 2 years out from that infrastructure being in place. And then the red projects there are included in the future phases, and the city's working to secure funding for those improvements, and they're doing a pretty good job of that so far. Pretty confident that those will be there at some point in the future. So kind of the ones that directly relate to this project out of those prioritized improvements, you can see that England Boulevard and George Elmer Drive. George Elmer exists currently through Flynn Ranch and 44 Ranch, and then Heron's Landing to the south, but the build grant will extend it to the north to England Boulevard, and then England Boulevard will be extended from the east to connect to Flynn Ranch in the existing section. The Tipperary Way Trail, which Dave touched on a little bit, was not prioritized in the first round of the build grant, but the portion across McNett Flats will be built by the developer. So Cody here at our office will talk a little bit, just touch briefly on the anticipated timeline, both of McNett Flats and these prioritized build grant improvements that you can see here.
Thanks, Matt. As Matt said, my name is Cody Schwartz here with White Engineering in Missoula. I'm just going to throw out a quick timeline here of the improvements in the area based on where we're at now and where we're going. So right now we're winter of 2021. We're going through planning board and city council reviews for the annexation and subdivision. We are currently working on final design of the roadway and utility improvements, and we are coordinating with 406 Engineering to our west on Remington Flats, and as well as with TJ&A and HDR, who are the consultants for the city on the building grant. If all goes as planned, approval of McNett Flats annexation and subdivision will be in March of 2021, with construction of public roadways and utilities to commence shortly after that. Spring of 2021, we might have a site design for a lot or two in. We don't have any finalized site plans yet for that portion of the project, but that's kind of where we're at. Construction of George Elmer and McNett Flats roadways will continue through the spring and summer. First build grant projects are supposed to be kicking off in the spring. We'll hopefully get to break ground at some point in 2021 on the construction of the first private developments in McNett Flats. And then the construction of the prioritized build grants, as Matt said, are supposed to be completed by the end of the 2022 construction season, which kind of lines up nicely with potential initial occupancy of any of the McNett Flat blocks. And then final occupancy of McNett, will be down the road. I can't predict the future on when exactly that will all happen, but all of these prioritized build grants should be completed by the time we are at final occupancy.
So, in addition to the surface improvements, the roadways, sidewalks, bike lanes, McNett Flats includes the design and installation of public utilities within those proposed right-of-ways. So it'll be served by extensions of the city of Missoula's public water and sanitary sewer systems. And those are something kind of similar to how the traffic impacts are analyzed. We can ensure that the new water and sanitary sewer mains that are built with this project will have the capacity to serve both McNett Flats and additional future developments further to the north, based on that maximum number of units that could be built based on the lot areas in the subdivision. The City of Missoula Engineering Department actually worked very closely with us to design these extensions of our city systems. They're really helpful through that process. We collaborated to ensure that those extensions will have capacity to supply water and sewer service, both to future developments in McNett Flats and additional future developments further to the north. So we thank the engineering department for that. They were very helpful in ensuring that that's all planned for. Stormwater runoff, Dave touched briefly on that. It'll be accommodated in McNett Flats through infiltration, which is similar to how it's accommodated in much of the rest of the city of Missoula. The City of Missoula and Newfields Inc., they're a local environmental engineering firm here in Missoula. They worked with us to prepare a hydrogeologic evaluation that analyzed the impacts of that runoff to the groundwater in the project vicinity. And that hydrogeologic evaluation found minimal impacts to both the groundwater elevation and nitrate concentrations beneath the site. So also in McNett Flats, the developer proposes installing bioretention basins at the street intersections. You can see the pictures of them there. Those are actually down at the Southgate Mall. The ones that will be built in McNett Flats are pretty similar to those. Those are probably the best example in the city of Missoula. They haven't been employed on a large scale throughout the city yet, but the purpose of those is just, it's a little bit of additional cleaning and treatment of that stormwater before it infiltrates into the ground. They work by using that native vegetation and the organic soils to treat that stormwater runoff when it flows into them from the roadways. And they'll remove additional sediments, regulate the temperature of the stormwater, and they'll remove metals through the plants and the organic soils. And in addition to that, they actually just provide an aesthetic benefit. It's additional landscaping that will be put at the intersections, and there's some visual appeal to those. So we're pretty excited to put those into practice, see the benefits that they provide, and hopefully we'll start to see those become more common and popular throughout the city of Missoula in the coming years.
I want to touch quick on the parklands. Dave went over this. There's kind of two options at play here. Our preferred option is the cash in lieu donation to support existing parklands. That value is estimated at $257,000. We prefer that method for a couple of reasons. Number one, it falls within the 44 ranch service area. As Dave said, the collector road of George Elmer is sometimes treated as a barrier to parks. We've taken some traffic calming that Matt talked about, and we've also looked at adding reflective trail crossing at that Pius Way intersection to allow residents on the east end of McNett Flats to safely cross George Elmer and use, a pretty well-established city park within 44 Ranch. It's a great city park. My family's been there often. And it's only 0.4 miles away from our subdivision, which is a really close place to get to for any of those residents. And we feel that $257,000 is a substantial amount of money that could be used for improvements on nearby parks or any expansions for new parks in the area. We also have a conservation easement that's nearby, highlighted on this image as well, kind of to our southeast that adjoins the Flynn Ranch subdivision. So like I said, our preference would be to do all cash in lieu. And the main reason, is we feel that we're providing that protected George Elmer Drive crossing, and it allows for that flexibility where we're not having to determine common areas on McNett Flats now, and we're not certain exactly what that full build out of that development is going to be. And if we're trying to come up with those common areas now, it might hinder some of the marketability of the lots.
So that's it for our presentation. We'll stay on the line for any questions that come up. I'm sure there will be some, and we'll be available here. So thank you to the planning board.
Matt, Dave, and Cody, that was very, very informative to understand the process you went through and the stage that you're at in development here. So I think that's it for presentations on this project. We'll move into the public comment portion of the public hearing. And so if we could have staff, if you could put the instructions on the screen for how folks can participate. I know we have several people who have joined or are currently in the Zoom meeting who may want to speak. As I said at the beginning of the meeting, if you in fact do want to speak on this topic here tonight, please use the raise hand function in your Zoom meeting console. It should be down in the lower right hand corner, and I'll call each name as I see it. If you're on the phone, I think you can use *9 to raise your hand and indicate that you'd like to speak. And then when it's your turn to speak, you'll use *6 to mute and unmute yourself. So I know there's still a delay for some folks who are viewing this, so I will go on mute for a couple minutes here and let folks who would like to speak have a chance to raise their hand in the Zoom console or call in and press *6. I'm not seeing any hands raised here. I'll just give another shout out in case folks need a chance to participate. I want to make sure they do have that chance. So we have quite a few people on the line. I'll give last call for comments here, and if there are no raised hands, we'll move on to the next portion. Okay, we've got some hands coming up here. I'll give it another minute. Okay, Brent Sperry, it'll be your turn to speak. You'll have 3 minutes to speak. Let me unmute you. No, I think, okay. When you're ready, Brent Sperry, please begin. You'll have 3 minutes. The floor is yours. Yeah, I can hear you. Hi.
I have a number of concerns with this just because my property borders, and I mean, it's no secret these are all going to be 3 to 4 story apartment buildings. It'll be right in my backyard, but biggest concern, I guess, for this planning board is going to be the traffic. I guess a good way that I pictured is if you went down to the apartments that were built by Mullen Road and then put a George Elmer Boulevard right through the middle of those. That's kind of what I'm envisioning this is going to be. And then with the traffic, I've seen, if you count Remington Flats, McNett, and Heron's Landing, I think it's going to be adding 6,000 to 7,000 vehicle trips per day. And the build grant has it going out England Boulevard and onto Mullen Road. So all that traffic's going to be essentially directed through residential neighborhoods, no matter which way they go. And I wonder if Mullen Road's ever been studied to see if it can handle that kind of traffic from, Flynn Lane into Reserve Street. And that's all I have. Thanks.
Brent, we're losing you there. Are you still with us?
Yeah.
Okay, great. You're going in and out. It might just be needing to get closer to the microphone.
Oh yeah. Where did you lose me at? I finished for what you didn't hear.
It was just a brief moment, Brent. I think you can continue.
Okay, I was just, my biggest concern was with the traffic and putting a major collector right through the middle of a huge apartment complex. And then if any studies have been done on what it would do to the 2-lane Mullen Road with an additional 6,000 to 7,000 vehicle trips per day coming out of Remington Flats, McNett Flats, and Heron's Landing. And that's all I had.
Great, thank you very much for your comment tonight, Brent. We have another commenter who'd like to speak. Phone number 1406*****789. So the floor is yours for 3 minutes. Please say your name before you start speaking.
Good evening. My name is John Hancock. I live on Granary Road within the Flynn Ranch subdivision, about a block from the southeast boundary of the McNett subdivision, better known, or at least on the map, Lot 4. I'm a past member of the Captain John Mullen Council, taking time to understand some of the ins and outs of various subdivisions. McNett Flats presents challenges in this grab bag of mixed use. Unlike nearby projects, such as Remington Flats to the west, Heron's Landing to the south, none sought to build apartments. In fact, if this body has not traveled the length of George Elmer Drive, it would be well advised to do so. Neither Flynn or 44 Ranch, which are separate projects, has a single apartment in them. Your tour might conclude that there are different housing forms, such as cottages, with significant differences in both size and affordability, a trend that Heron's Landing intends to follow. I do not oppose growth. However, the developer representatives refuse to affirm or deny that this zoning is for the purpose of building an estimated 650 three-story apartments. It's the high-rise apartments that significantly upset the beauty and character of the neighborhood. I learned of this project last fall and brought up a potential snow removal issue on a private road in Flynn Ranch leading towards the new subdivision. Our 2 ward council members visited the Flynn Ranch, surveyed the impacted area, and may have interacted in some manner with Mr. de Grand Prix. Calls and email occurred on numerous occasions regarding the snow, and 3 project representatives who are on the call tonight met to examine the issue. This occurred with the Flynn Ranch Homeowners Association Board of Directors, committee members, and concerned citizens. Unfortunately, Mr. de Grand Prix had to bow out at the last minute due to a health issue. The meeting was not rescheduled. The issue remains unresolved. This body might be moved by the prospect of the Tipperary Trail being included in the overall building plan. Do not be misled. The overall intent of the trail is to go well east of the McNett property, extending to Flynn Lane to give school children the opportunity to walk or bike to Hellgate Elementary, a highly worthy project. The problem is that the Mullen-Build representatives have not been able to get an easement, and now approximately 270 acres are up for sale with no certainty that a new owner would grant the right of way. I'm also hasten to tell the board that the original plan to go through Tipperary plan was rejected by the homeowner in that area. So the certainty of this trail remains in doubt. And there may be ways to put a deposit in case they ever get the approval for it, and you could revisit on that whole issue. Now, the Engage Missoula website was late in accepting public questions. We were aware that governance came through sometime in early December, but I recommend delaying approving this request and give the public more opportunity to weigh in on the project, as the Mullen-Build is close to holding a final series of public meetings that give a clear picture of the path ahead. I would also ask this body to review a statement issued by the Missoula Airport in connection with this project. That is not on the Engage Missoula website. The question was raised this morning. Thank you for your consideration, and I'm available to conduct any tours you might require, including pointing out additional issues relating to both snow removal and flood concerns from a nearby irrigation ditch that can harm the trail. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for your comment tonight. Okay, this will be a last call for folks who'd like to speak. One more chance. I'll go off for a minute here, or 2 minutes. And if anyone would like to speak tonight, they will be able to do so. Okay, seeing no more hands raised or people indicating a desire to speak, we will move on to questions from planning board members. We have planning staff here, Dave and Emily, and several representatives from the developer. So please raise your hand and we'll go in order, try and give every person a chance to ask their questions once. You can ask multiple questions, but have one chance before we go on to having a second round. So with that, would anybody like to start us off? Neva.
Yeah, I'll start off with this because it's a process question. So my understanding is the annexation and the zoning change have been referred to the city council. We don't see those. So technically, this land is still in the county. And so, and therefore, I don't understand why we would apply the city growth policy. So that's like a process question for me. And then relatedly, I'd like to know, I mean, is this proposal meeting the spirit of the annexation policy? I have no idea. We're kind of, it's like completely we're like asked to consider something that isn't yet in the city, but use the city standards. That doesn't quite make sense to me. So I'm trying to understand.
I can address that. I appreciate your confusion, because there are multiple steps in this. And actually the first presentation that Emily and I put together, Emily mostly, had all the annexation and zoning steps in as well. What I would try to do was consolidate, and that's something that we'll take to council because that's their purview. So we're not trying to hide anything, obviously, just trying to keep it, it was 30 slides as it was, so just trying to keep it at a manageable level. But back to the part of the question about process. So subdivisions, annexations, and zonings can proceed concurrently. So it can all move along. There are really 3 different administrative procedural steps, but they can all happen at the same time. And Montana law sets it up so there don't have to be quite as many public hearings and procedural hoops to jump through. But in terms of the annexation policy, so this area, this property is within the city's preferred area for annexation. It's in the city's annexation policy. It's called Annexation Area A. And what that means is that annexation in this particular area meets all, if not all, of the guidelines for annexation. It's a preferred area. It's a place where services like water, sewer, police, fire protection, schools, things like that can all be provided in a cost-effective, logical, efficient manner. So it does comply with the annexation policy. And I guess I'm not sure if, but your question is why review? Yes, it is still technically in the city. City council adopted a resolution of intent. I'm sorry, in the county. Thanks for shaking your head, Neva. City council adopted a resolution of intent to annex the property and apply the B22 zoning. But the idea is to move it along all at the same time. Council ultimately will make a decision. Annexation will have to come first, like you're pointing out. The property has to be annexed into the city for city council to have the actual authority to apply the zoning and also to review the subdivision application. But the idea is to move it along all through at the same time, so it doesn't take 9 months, to go through this process.
Eva, does that satisfy your question?
Well, kind of. I don't. I'm not sure I agree with that analysis. Our job is not to speed things along, especially when we're looking at something where a massive amount of public money has been invested and they're relying on these roads that you and I are paying for. And we're supposed to just, know that it's going to automatically be annexed into the city and that it's going to be zoned the way these people want it to be zoned. That's a little much for me to, I've never seen this happen. This is my 6th year. I've never seen this happen on the planning board.
David, do you have anything to add to that?
But that's good enough. Now I have a bunch of other questions about the transportation, but I've got.
I'm going to add in my understanding, and just because I think it might help clarify this question that Neva has. Dave, in my reading of the staff report, it seemed like the city council will consider the rezoning annexation and subdivision at the same time. Is that true?
That is true.
Okay.
Yeah, and if you look at the beginning of the staff report, it lays out several procedural steps, several meetings that are occurring. Like I said, they adopted a resolution of intent. Then just because of the way the calendar works out and the way the planning board meetings are scheduled, we scheduled the planning board public hearing next. The land use and planning committee will consider it on this, I think it's the 17th. They'll hold the actual public hearing after that, and then there'll be an additional consideration. So there are lots of opportunities for the public to comment and weigh in. That's just how the calendar fell out.
Yes, Nita,
Can I
please.
just ask a really quick follow-up to that, Dave? So if a place is in the, would you call it the annexation area A or priority A or something? So if a place is in that area, so it's automatically going to be annexed? Or aren't there some criteria for reviewing the annexation?
Yes, there are.
And aren't there, because my big concern here is the lack of congruence with the Mullen area plan. So I need to know that some of these things will be considered, and that's why I'm asking this. You're making it sound like it's in area A, so therefore it's a done deal. But I don't think government really works that way, does it? Hopefully not.
No, it's not a guarantee that any property would be annexed. The city has to look at it and see if it makes sense, you know, in terms of providing services as well. Annexation, the different annexation areas. I think I wasn't working for the city when that policy was developed. You may know more about it than I do, but the way I understand it, the city tried to provide areas that were essentially preferred for annexation. It does not guarantee that any particular property will be annexed. You know, when the city is not typically in the business of reaching out and grabbing parcels of land and bringing them in, it's usually developer driven or private property owner driven. When someone wants access to city water and sewer and to develop their property to urban standards, they request annexation, and then the city evaluates it. So no, it's not a rubber stamp. It's not a guarantee.
And tonight, this land is in the county. That's just, I want to clarify.
True.
Okay, next Dave, and then Caroline, then Jim.
So I want to add on to what Neva, 2 points. One is I noticed in the staff report that there's, according to MCA, they're supposed to meet 3 significant findings, right, Dave? And the staff stretch in order to find 1. I know that's not our job. I just throw that out there. So what's this all about? Why is this? Why are we looking at this? That's not our purview, no, as I understand it, even though it's all going on in the same kind of motion, if you will.
Dave, I think that's a misinterpretation. I believe you're talking about the annexation policy and annexation and zoning to meet one of 3 criteria. There are 3 potential criteria.
Oh, zoning upon annexation in your staff report, right?
Yeah, and
page 9.
That's yes, we're talking about the same thing.
Okay.
You have to meet 1 criteria, not 3.
Okay, and my only point is, yes, and I think you guys did a good job. My point is it flat out does not meet 2, and you stretched it to meet the 3rd. Just to follow up what Neva was saying about annexation seems to be, I don't know. I think it's the wrong question. My question, if I may, Neva also had another question. I don't know if I have a question about it. Well, I do, to staff. We understand that this preceded legally is allowed to come in and doesn't need to comply with our new zoning criteria. Did the staff ever discuss, and did it make a difference, I guess, the development potential for this area on the B22 versus our form-based code would be significantly different. And it really upsets me that the city is going to be saddled with this project because that's a done deal. That's just a comment, I realize, and it's going to move ahead. It's pretty upsetting for the city and county to go through all that work. And here's another one of these old-fashioned. So that's a comment, not a criticism. All right, thank you.
Hey, could you if you could maybe just talk about the standard that needs about sufficiency review and maybe like the timing of that and how it applies here.
Sure. Let me see here. So the Mullen Area Master Plan, I'll just use that word, and the form-based code were just recently adopted. I think it just, I'm not sure if they went into effect in December or January, but recently. There's a section of Montana law, it's under Montana subdivision law, that says, I talked about it earlier in the presentation, that the rules that are in effect when an application is deemed sufficient are the rules that the subdivision has to go by. And I do want to point something out to you. You know, it took me a while to get my head around to understand. So, you know, typically we think about a zoning area, you know, we look at it on a map and we think of it as a geographic area. But actually the way that this is set up with the city for the Mullen form-based code, it actually doesn't become effective on the property into the city until the city proposes, or until the developer proposes annexation. So this property actually isn't in the Mullen form-based code area the way the plan is written. And again, I struggled with this concept myself because I typically think of, you know, you think of a large geographic area and everything within it is zoned according to that. But the way it's written, the rules will apply. It applies on county property already, but no county property is going to be developed like that because it all requires, because the Mullen form-based code requires sewer and water, requires urban density, requires urban services. But at the end of the day, just at the end of the day, the application was deemed sufficient. I mean, they started this process a year ago. I think probably, I don't know when the form-based code and the Mullen plan was initiated, probably at about a similar time. I can't speak to that. I wasn't involved in that process early on. But I know that when I came on board last February, about a year ago, the Mullen plan was underway, and this subdivision, they'd also had pre-application preliminary meetings. So, I mean, I know it's disappointing, but I do want to point out to you, and I tried to emphasize it, that the growth policy for the city and the county all recommend urban scale mixed use development in this area. So I guess that isn't sufficient, but anyway, you know, we talked a lot about it at the staff level. It's not ideal, but you know, you can't, the city didn't put a moratorium on development. The city could have. They could have adopted interim zoning and said, all right, while we develop this plan, we're not going to allow any development applications to come in. But the city didn't do that. And so this is the consequence of it, that subdivisions or projects get kind of, they squeak under, they get grandfathered in. You know, I mean, I can't do anything about that, and I'm not going to try to throw up barriers either.
Great, thanks for that explanation, Dave. That's helpful. We'll go to Caroline, then Jim, Shane, and Neva. We'll get to you in the second round. So Caroline.
Okay, thanks. I have a few questions on streets and then parks. So my first question is, if typical regulations are for the 90-foot right-of-way and the 80-foot right-of-way for which the variances are, but we can accomplish all of the goals of those streets in the 80 and 64, why do we require 90 and 80? Like, what are we missing? Or is it just truly extra space?
Well, those rules were developed a dozen years ago, probably. I don't know. You know, I've got to think that extra space might have been required just in case the road's built out and additional facilities are needed. And I think also our concepts have changed a little bit. You know, we used to build roads a lot bigger. We used to build drive lanes a lot bigger and enable traffic to go a lot faster. And I think, you know, over the years, we've learned some things, and now we try to make tighter spaces. One of the things that they've incorporated into this project that Matt Hammerstein was talking about was, you know, bulb outs at intersections, traffic calming devices, and things like that. So we just have a different understanding now of how roads should be built. But I can't speak to the original thinking. But anyway, I hope that helps.
No, that does. Does it affect transit at all? I thought I saw a comment from Mountain Line saying that they did not like the proposed smaller width because it would possibly impact bus service.
That was a comment that we received. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And, Caroline, this is Matt Hammerstein with Voith Engineering. That comment actually related specifically to George Elmer Drive, and that roadway is included in the build grant improvements. So it's kind of a little bit out of our control from a design standpoint what those lane widths are going to be, because we have to match the proposed improvements to the north and the south on George Elmer Drive.
Okay, thank you. Another street question. For Abbey Road or Abbey Lane, I saw in the traffic impact study, it was 1,000 trips per day estimated for east and then 2,000 on west. And the comments from the transportation department said that it could be elevated to a collector road because of that volume. So my question was, is the urban local designation correct? And how does that interact with the traffic study and the transportation department's comments?
Well, I think the urban local street designation provides for streets that have a anticipated volume of up to 2,500 vehicle trips per day. And I think that falls within the numbers that you just cited.
It does. I was just curious because those transportation comments, I'm just pulling them up, sorry. They say that per subdivision standards, volumes over 1,000 trips per day could elevate the street to a collector status. So that's just an optional intermediary spot at the volumes it's at right now?
Yeah, I guess so. You know, what we do when we receive an application like this is the city has, well, the developer hires it. We require a traffic impact study to be completed by the developer and provide parameters for what that study should contain. And it's our transportation engineers that do that. And then we have a contract engineer who works for WGM Group, who's specializes in transportation, that reviews those studies and provides recommendations back to the city officials, city transportation people, and also the developer. And you know, we in the planning office, the current planning office, we are kind of the conduits of this communication. We kind of facilitate this whole process where we get their comments back. If they express either support or don't express opposition, then we tend to move forward with it. You know, we're in pretty close communication though we talk almost on a daily basis with our transportation engineers. And I haven't heard anything back from them indicating that they did not support the rights of way, the variances, or the street configurations or anything else in this project.
Okay, thank you. And then just, sorry, one final question about park space. Was there ever a discussion about, since the developer is concerned about preserving flexibility, were they open to like more like pocket park type ideas rather than a large dedication of land on the one area of the parcel? Perhaps that's better for discussion later, but I was just curious more about, it seems like that's a point of opposition of what staff is recommending and what the developer would prefer to move forward with.
I think maybe the developer could answer that question better than I.
Yeah, it's definitely, you know, I would guess that if the staff recommendation is what went, it would probably be more similar to those pocket park type things that you were mentioning, rather than one big swath. But that's about all I can say to that right now.
All right, thanks. Those are all of my questions.
Thank you, Caroline. Jim.
I'm going to pass this time. My question got kind of answered in the last round.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jim. Next we have Shane.
Thanks. I guess a question for staff. How many more projects are grandfathered in this area right now?
None that you haven't seen already. It's only Remington Flats to the west, Heron's Landing to the south, and then this project.
Shane, you're muted somehow. Doesn't look muted, but now you're really muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Sorry, my microphone's funky today. So 7 lots in the subdivision. That seems intentional unless there's a future consideration of a further subdivision. Should we be looking at this as apartment style buildings that don't require further subdivision. Is that what the anticipated plan here is?
Sorry, I was just unmuting Shane. This is Cody Swartz with Wave Engineering again. The lot sizes were flexible so that if they did sell to a different developer that had plans for further division, that further division could be done under that form-based code.
Okay, perfect.
Dave, could you follow up on that point? Is it appropriate for planning board to consider what will be built as a result of a subdivision? Or is it a situation like a rezoning where we really should be considering the subdivision irrespective of what's done after the approval?
Yeah, that's a good question and a hard question, because we're talking about the subdivision of land, but we're also trying to evaluate the potential impacts, and it's really hard to evaluate impacts without considering land use and what might go there. They're kind of inextricably linked. It's a tough situation, but we don't require developers to tell us exactly, and we don't know. We don't know exactly what we'll locate on the project. I mean, realistically, a developer could anticipate one land use today, but we might have another recession, and the lots might sell, and there might be something totally different in 10 years. And so it's kind of I guess a best guess. It's the nature of it. And so what I can tell you though is that the zoning does allow a wide variety of land uses, from civic uses to single dwelling residential and commercial and office and lots of things in between. So I appreciate, this is one of the comments that I've heard from the public as well. They're kind of, people have said, well, it's really hard for us to comment on this because we don't know exactly what's going to go there. And I sympathize with that, it's true. But that's kind of the hand that we're dealt right now.
Thanks, Dave.
So just finally, I mean, what you have to do is do your best to determine whether the project complies with the criteria, whether it meets the criteria under subdivision rules or not. And if you feel that it doesn't, then we need to go back and maybe take a look at some of the staff report and some of the criteria that we have, the evaluation that we have, and I'll need some guidance and some information to pass on to council. But I think looking at the criteria and evaluating the application, the information that you have under those criteria is the way to go.
Totally. Yeah, I agree. Just a couple questions to follow up on some of Caroline's questions. So with the change in the width of the right of way, does that affect it won't affect, cars driving on the road, but will it affect bus stops and things like that are part of the public realm that, the right of way change could potentially, it doesn't just impact, cars, it also impacts the other things adjacent to the right of way and that public realm. Are we slimming this up too much along George Elmer to accommodate real bus traffic and stops necessary?
Jane, this Spencer Boyd with Boyd Engineering. So on George Elmer Drive, that was one of the reasons that we offered up the 5-foot easement on either side of the roadway, is that it's not a full dedication of 90 feet, but still leaving some option open for the city in the future.
So that easement would allow for public access on a private piece of land then?
That is correct.
Okay. I think that's all I had for questions. Thanks.
Dave, did you have anything to add to that? You're about to answer. Okay. Great, we'll move. Next up is Josh.
Hi, good evening. Everybody hear me okay?
Yeah, sound good.
So I guess my question is related to a comment that was submitted by Ben Brewer, an associate planner. I think a lot of his conclusions and comments summarize my feelings about what we're seeing tonight. And primarily, I guess, the fact where he says at the end, that he'd be remiss if he didn't point out that this area is included in the upcoming Mullen Area Master Plan. And that would provide many opportunities to for development in line with the new form-based code. It almost seemed like it was in opposition, I guess, to what we're hearing tonight. And is that, I guess my question is that common to hear a comment from somebody within development services that seems to go maybe not directly against, but maybe in conflict with what the recommendation is from you, Dave, or am I misinterpreting this?
I think I don't think it's uncommon at all. People have differing opinions on developments and how it ought to be. And, we all have different specialties too. I think, in different areas of expertise and different areas of emphasis, professional and personal. So I don't think it's uncommon.
Thank you.
Dave, can I add to some of the confusion with how, this is Cody again with Voith Engineering, how we are going through Title 20 as compared to the form-based code. I just wanted to point out that
Cody, excuse me, is this in response to Josh's question or something else?
Yeah, it is.
Okay. Thanks.
Just with the fact that there is that conflict between the form-based code and going through Title 20. I just wanted to point out that we started working on this project, midway through 2019 before the city had even started working on that form-based code. And there's a lot of planning and development of this subdivision. There was a lot of design work that was already done and contemplated before, that first initial design charrettes for that form-based code came out in March of 2020. We'd already been working on this project for over 6 months, and throughout the process, we've tried to reach out to people that are involved in that and coordinate and collaborate the best we can to make sure that our road types are matching them and we're meeting up as best we can to move forward with that, but knowing that we were already well into design on a lot of these items.
Yeah, I appreciate that and understand that. Thank you.
Thanks, Josh. Next is Micah.
Thanks. I have a process question as a pretty new board member. I'm wondering what the potential, future trajectories for this project are in terms of what would it take for this to come back to the planning board after final platting? Would it have to be one of these lots if it was divided into more than 5 sublots? Is that when it would come back to us?
It would come back if there was any division. I think it's any division. Maybe it would be more than 5. I'd have to look at the city subdivision regulations. It could be, you could be right. It could be if it's more than 5 lots broken out of one of these lots. I think that would trigger it.
Okay, but if these were developed, each of these lots was developed as apartment buildings, and this is potentially the last time that it would come before the planning board. Is that right? It didn't require additional subdividing.
That's right.
Okay. And then I had a question too about just reading through the conditions of annexation. It seems like the city council has put in there the 1.46 acres of parkland east of George Elmer as a requirement of annexation. Am I reading that correctly? I know that it still has to be approved by them, but it seems like that's what it is saying in the documents that we received.
All those conditions, both for annexation and the subdivision, are recommendations of staff.
Okay. So those still need to be approved by the city council.
Right.
Okay. And I had one other question about the comments from the airport administration. It seems like just a small corner of this parcel is in their influence zone, but they were raising objections. I'm wondering if those were addressed and brought into the project as it developed.
I've not seen those comments.
Okay, those were, I guess, in the developer packet.
Where were those, Micah?
They were in the developer provided packet, the application attachment number 25, the agency correspondence.
Yes, this is Spencer Wood with Engineering. We are in the airport influence area, and we've acknowledged that, and it's in the covenants to acknowledge that there is going to be noise and such things that occur around an airport, and it is included in our covenants, and it is going to be part of the recorded documents for its development going forward.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Micah. Andy, you're up.
Yeah, that actually was building on one of the comments I had. I sort of find this process interesting in the fact, and it's part of a governmental process where there's been extreme amount of public vetting, time, energy put into the mull and build plan. And it seems like, and maybe this is a question for Emily or Dave, but it seems like there are sort of things that, just a couple examples is one is the airport. The airport was opposed to a lot of the concepts of the density of the mull and build plan inside the influence zone for noise, electronic interference, wildlife. A number of concerns were raised. And it seems like agencies decided that that was not sufficient enough to acknowledge. Another example we saw is we have bill grants to plan for roads, and we're promoting extreme amounts of public transit, bikes, buses, but then we have road corridors that doesn't satisfy the jurisdiction, the public transit's going to provide that transit. You know, they don't want that road section. So it just seems weird that we build this mousetrap with this government process dictating what we want, and then we have a project that doesn't meet it on its own design standards for a road standard, or ignoring a thing like a major airport and expansion of an airport. And I guess that kind of goes back into one of the findings, and I have not seen any comment, and I find it really interesting. And this comes back to this typical political hot button of the impacts to ag. We've got 20 acres in ag. I don't even see a comment from CFAC about it. I don't see any comments yet brought up. And the determination of this mitigation for ag was it complies with local planning documents and it meets zoning. Subdivisions come before us all the time that do that exact same thing, and we can't get over the hump because it's so significant. It's detrimental. We can't mitigate it. And there's zero mitigation proposed for that. So I'm not picking on this project because I am for development and all those things, but it just is a process that I find extremely frustrating. And the track we lay as a government, a regulatory agency, then we don't follow our own policies, and then we ignore major cultural issues or political issues like effects on ag, and it's not even raised in this document. So those are my concerns, I guess, in a nutshell.
Thanks, Andy. Are there any more questions from planning board members for staff? So if we could, Donna, Neva, right, you have Neva.
I have a question, but not everybody got to ask something, so maybe they want to, but.
No, that was the chance, Neva. We're into the second round, so.
Are you sure?
Right.
Like Tung and Sean and, okay. My question is, well, I'm concerned about the ag land mitigation. Thank you, Andy. I really appreciate bringing that up. The lack of ag mitigation, I'm concerned about park dedication. The one subdivision doesn't get to like rely on another. So, you know, there is a park in 44 Ranch because there should be a park there. And it was stated early on that, well, I guess I'm giving comments, but I just want to clarify one thing is that cash in lieu for park dedication, it cannot be used for maintenance on other parks. So cash in lieu, the cash in lieu fund is like basically sat there because there's never been enough money to buy, and that's pretty much all I can do with it. And so I just want to kind of point that out because it's part of this picture of and lack of clarity around parkland dedication in this project that is of concern to me. The biggest thing I guess I want to know why we don't have a better understanding of what is going to be built, because and how many units are going to be there. I mean, and what impact that is going to have on the traffic. So I guess I'm like Josh said earlier, it's, you know, it's hard to be approving something that isn't meeting the current, you know, wants these variances, isn't meeting the current, you know, thing that we just passed. And I understand that you didn't have to technically, but you know, it would be, you know, you are taking advantage of public money. And so that's where it gets really challenging for me to like, anyway, I'd really like to know how we're going to absorb that much traffic turning onto Mullen from George Elmer without dedicated public transportation. And I don't see that happening here without being built into the whole network of the plan.
Dave or Cody, I mean, maybe to get at Neva's question, could you at all talk about the analysis that went into the Mullen area or the Subdivision area plan? I mean, we were assured at that time that the road network that was planned could accommodate the new housing. Is that right?
And is this more than that, or is it different than that? Thank you. That's a better way of saying it, Vince.
Well, what I can tell you is a roundabout is planned to be constructed at the intersection of George Elmer and Mullen. And that's where there are, you're shaking your head or not satisfied with that answer. It's 90% designed and construction is planned to start this summer and be completed by November of next year. Did I miss the question?
Well, I guess part of it is I don't know exactly what the number of units are going to be here. So we don't know whether that roundabout in the transportation you're proposing is sufficient. And whether or not like Mountain Line will come out there and whether or not we'll have, you know, it really will be built into this network. From what I'm hearing, there's still lots of questions about that. Maybe I'm wrong, but I missed that then.
Well, I'm certainly under the impression that the transportation improvements through the Mullen Build Grant, which this developer has to participate in as well, will have to pay impact fees or join some special district. That's delineated in one of the conditions of approval. So I'm certainly under the impression that the planned improvements can accommodate this traffic and traffic from other developments.
So how much traffic is this proposal going to add exactly? How many, I mean, I guess maybe you already said this and I missed it, but like how many units are going to be there? Where are they going to park? That's the other thing. Where is this? Is the parking all along the roads? What's going to happen on these lots? We don't know anything. I can't support this. There's such little information. I'm sorry, I know that's not a question, but I see all these questions that are still glaring there. What is being built here? What will it look like? Where will people park? How will they get onto the main roads? I don't see that in the design. Am I missing something? Am I dense? And what am I missing it? I don't understand.
You know, my only response, Steve, is that it's a process and it goes one step at a time. And so, no, not all of the answers are apparent right now. But that's the nature of it. You know, this is the subdivision of land. It's not if this property is subdivided, a final plat's filed, and someone wants to build on lot 2, they then have to come into the city with a proposal for a structure that and also parking and landscaping and meeting all of the other requirements of the city through a site plan process. It's a building permit site plan process. If they want to subdivide the lots further, if there are more than 5 lots, as Micah stated, it'll come back to you. So no, we don't have all the answers today, but we're not going to either. Like we don't have site. That's not really how it works.
Usually we have a better sense. Well, okay, I guess I just never really seen anything quite like this one before. And the way it's being proposed, the process, the way it's being kind of pushed through. And so thanks for your response, but I really find this a very strange one. And really not like spirit of where the whole community has been, right? Because the what's different here, you guys, is that they aren't the character and the form-based code that we just put into place in this whole area will be completely ignored in this process, largely. And so, and yet they will benefit from all the roads and everything else. So.
Thanks, Neva. All right, next is Caroline and then Dave.
Are we on discussion now, or is it still just second round of questions?
No, thanks for bringing it up, Caroline. We're still on questions. So the way this will work, when we are done asking questions of staff and engineering and the engineering folks, I'd like to ask for a motion and to put a motion on the table. And once we have a motion and it's seconded, there'll be an opportunity for all of us to talk and discuss our views, having had all of our questions answered that we need to come to a decision on this. So.
Got it. Well, mine was more of a point of discussion. I lost track of where we were, so I'll save that for later.
Okay, thanks, Caroline. Dave, if you have a question, please. I think you're muted still. You're still muted, Dave.
Okay, sorry about that. Maybe this is to Dave, and then I'm going to suggest something that one way for maybe even us to look at it with help from staff is, okay, if we want to know what the build out is, the first question is in the B22, what's the density of units per acre? And then you have 15 plus acres times density. They give you, what you get you, it's a maximum. And then as you take away, I mean, parking doesn't have to be on site. Parking, I mean, as surface parking can be under, depending who builds what. Then the other question is looking at a different angle. Okay, let's say a half or even a full was commercial. What kinds of densities does the B22 commercial have? What kind of build out would that be? Each one would would at least yield, in my opinion, some impact numbers, which would then you could work on, okay, this is the kind of traffic we're gonna have, this is the number of people are gonna have, these are the kind of uses we can have under the B22. It's just a thought here about, not an instant analysis, but maybe staff can help us out on that.
Yeah, sure. So, and Emily, feel free to jump in too if you have something to add. I don't mean to take over. Do you want to address this question?
Sure. I mean, we can definitely give you the general parameters of what B2-2 would allow.
And I think that will at least put some insight into what the maximums could be. In the B2-2 district, it's 1,000 square feet per dwelling unit. And I mean, that just kind of gives you the maximum, but usually space is deducted for accounting for the parking requirements, landscaping. So even though we kind of say it's up to that point, and this is without doing this calculation in my head right now, so I can't give you what that exact maximum number would be, but
with engineering, the maximum units is what we included in our traffic impact study that was provided. We figured for the maximum for all the traffic, water and sewer and storm drain design, we figured the max, and it's 650 units is the maximum amount, and that would produce the most amount of traffic if it was all residential rather than commercial. Typically, those residential units drive the traffic counts up higher. I had something else, but I think I'm going to wait until a different question because it kind of eluded me right now. I was talking a little too fast. Yeah, I'll follow up just on a couple of things. This is Spencer Boyd. So when it comes to a building permit, there are absolutely City of Missoula has criteria that every building site has to meet. Whether it's residential, single family, duplex, multifamily, commercial, there are parking requirements, there are landscape requirements, and all of that is in the code. It gets built, whether it's by this developer or it's sold to somebody else, that developer, that builder then has to meet all of those codes that are already in place in the city of Missoula.
Lost you there.
Sorry, did you hear what I had said?
We lost you mid-sentence.
Okay, so no matter what happens, no matter what gets built by this developer or another developer, if it's single family, duplexes, multifamily, commercial, there are still criteria of the city of Missoula for parking, landscaping, setbacks. Everything that gets built will ultimately have to meet that same code that's already established by the city of Missoula.
Okay, thanks for that. That clarifies one of the questions we heard earlier. Okay, it's not looking like there's many questions. Dave's gone back onto mute. If there are no further questions from folks, like I said, I would entertain or like to see a motion on the table. If we could, staff, if we could get, Shane, you've got a question here. Please.
Well, this was offered up earlier, and I wanted to maybe ask Dave and Neva if they wanted to hear this, but I think that there was a traffic engineer on the call, and do we want to hear from that person or no? I don't need to, but just wanted to throw that out there.
I mean, I think the information was provided in the staff report and the presentations about the amount of traffic that they expect to be provided. We don't know exactly how many units will be built, but those estimates were based on the maximums. So, okay. Regarding the motions, staff has indicated that it's all right. I don't know if you mentioned this in your presentation, Dave, but we can handle the variances all at once, all under one motion. Dave, does that mean, could we approve the subdivision and the variances at once, or should they be separate motions?
I think it might be helpful, Emily, if you share your screen and put up, there are some different motions that are available. I don't know that we want to do all the variances at the same time, but some of them are quite similar. And so maybe that would shorten things up a little bit, but also make sure that you have the opportunity to look at them specifically.
Sorry, I'm just bringing it up again.
Shane, you got a question, please? I see, sorry. Got to be diligent with lowering the hands.
You want me to start with the subdivision motion or go through the variance motions up?
Yeah, if you could show the subdivision motion, and then if there's a way to show, yeah, and then if you could walk us through the variances.
Oops, sorry.
Okay.
So, and then the variance ones, I mean, they're all separate motions, but variance 1 is pertaining to George Elmer. 2 and 3 are separate motions written, but both pertaining to the 64-foot right of way instead of the 80-foot requirement for Old Ranch Road, and then all of the other roads. So Winchester, Briar, Remington, Abbey. 4 and 5 are both block length. They're identical. One is for lot 1 and one is for lot 6. And then variance motion number 6 is for the right-of-way width on Pius Way.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I think we should take the subdivision first. And so, if once there's a motion on the table, it's seconded, we'll have discussion on the motion and vote before we go to other motions. So would someone like to make a motion, the motion that's on the screen or otherwise, to take action on the McNett Flats subdivision?
I'll go ahead and make a motion, Vince.
Thanks, Josh.
Yeah, I'll move that we approve the McNett Flats subdivision subject to the recommended conditions of approval based on the findings of fact and conclusions of law in the staff report.
Very nice. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Sean. Okay, so now we get to discuss the motion on the floor. We'll go around again, give everyone a chance to speak before we go to second rounds, myself included this time. And if you can, keep your discussion points to the motion. You know, we'll be discussing the variances separately. So I have comments myself that are directly to the variances, but we'll save those for later. So who'd like to go first? You can raise your hand virtually or physically, either way. All right, we'll go Josh first. And
I guess I'll defend my motion. I think in this case, you know, they played by the rules of the road at the time, you know, what they were at the time of application. And as much as I have some heartburn about that, those are the rules. And I tend to agree with Mr. Brewer from Development Services that I think there's a pretty decent likelihood that this is going to lead to an outcome that is not consistent with what the form-based code and new growth policy desires in neighborhood mixed use with a node land use designation, meaning compact development, walkability, mixed use, not monolithic, multi-level apartment dwellings. However, that's not the rules of the road that they are required to adhere to. And for that reason, I will support the motion.
thanks, Josh. Would anyone else like to speak to the motion? Caroline.
Thanks. I agree with Josh's comments on, you know, on how we're thinking about the Solipticon plan and how this may or may not align with it. My one concern with the motion is with part of the transportation discussion we were having, condition 14, which specifically calls out Abbey Lane and is the one that's running kind of through the middle of the development. And it's, in my readings of the different comments, it seems like that road is going to need more bike infrastructure, more substantive bike infrastructure than what is currently proposed. And so I would have concern with that just being designed as an urban local rather than the collector, especially given the traffic impact study showing possibly 2,000 trips per day on the west side of it. So that's the one thing I'm thinking about, but otherwise I agree they played by the rules that were in place. And B22 does not preclude a lot of the things the spirit of the Solipticon plan. You know, there could still be mixed use with high intensity residential and commercial. So while it's not an exact form-based code, I wouldn't say we have to throw out the baby with the bathwater for that part of it.
Caroline, could you clarify the point on Abbey Lane? Where are you getting that? Is that in the bike plan or the Solipticon plan?
It's in the transportation department's comments, which are attachment 5 agency comments. They are, so I'm opening that up too. It's their first bullet point and then the second one indented, and they say, per the subdivision standards, volumes over 1,000 trips per day for Abbey Lane could elevate the street to a collector status and require additional facilities such as bike lanes. And the traffic impact study estimates 1,000 trips per day on the east side and 2,000 trips per day on the west side of Abbey Lane. And that's in their separate traffic impact study. And the transportation agency, they also add a few more things about traffic coming from Remington Flats. And so they end part of that comment saying, there will be a need for bike lanes along these roads, so any street design should consider those improvements. And right now they are not in the street sections as proposed.
Okay, I see. Thanks for clarifying that. Dave, you're up.
So I agree to the point starting with what Josh was saying. Yes, they started out and followed the rules, and I get that. And that's how we got to where we are. Fair enough. I can't support the subdivision because I don't feel that they met the growth policy standards. There's a specific about that these areas of the neighborhood mixed use are to characterize by commercial uses, and they're to identify a visible and distinctive focal point. I'm not shown anything in this application that it does that. So I think that's why I cannot agree with the findings of fact proposed by staff, and that's where I'm coming from about why I don't think the subdivision meets the findings of fact that are needed in order to move forward. And that's my point. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Would anyone like to, well,
I'll throw out why I'll be voting against this. Yeah, they played by the rules but that alone is not our job to decide a question based on that. Our job is to look at the findings of fact and the finding law, and to consider the larger community interest here. And primarily, rules of the game that people are referring to are the ones with respect to subdivision review, which is set out by state law. And we see no really good parkland dedication plan here, in my view. It sounds like the trail may or may not get it into place based on the testimony. And so when you have 650 units possibly here and no parkland for them, really, I think that's problematic. And that is a requirement of state law. State law also requires us to consider the impacts to agriculture and agricultural water. They have not been mitigated here. It doesn't matter whether some larger, statement about this is going to be urban area. Right now, this land is in the county. It's part of a major planning area. I don't feel like the public interest is being fully served by this proposal, and therefore I'll be voting against it. I appreciate that, the timing is awkward, but I think even if this was coming to us out of the blue to drop this down in the middle of those fields and we didn't have the Subdivision plan, I would still oppose it because it's not integrated into the area very well in a way that we can really envision as with the form-based code. The public has spent a tremendous amount of money paying planners, paying to do this build project, right? And paying to do the Dover coal process, whatever. And to just say that spirit doesn't matter, I think is erroneous. And I'll say one last thing. If we can look at on the slides Dave put up tonight, he put up the housing policy. Well, actually, that is not a criteria in subdivision review. And so if we can consider the housing policy, we certainly can consider the spirit of the plan that was put into place. And so, and the developer's process has overlapped with the plan. There's no reason why the developer couldn't have worked more with the planning office to make this meet the character of the community that we're expecting. So to go on, but I'll stop now. But that's why I will not be supporting this. It's not about, it's about what's required under subdivision law, which is what I'm supposed to make the decision on, and the growth policy and the planning documents for this community, which are in place right now. And so, thank you.
Thanks, Neva. So we've heard strong arguments for and against. Would anyone else like to express their view before I want to talk with you, Caroline, more about your potential amendment here as well?
I have a question for Neva. Well, in the one comment about Parkland, that is in the conditions that they would provide the 1.46. I know it's not the full 3.1, so it's not as if it's a given that it would only be cash in lieu. And then I was wondering if the people who feel like the Solipticon plan is not, the spirit of that plan is not being represented, could speak more to that, because I'm having trouble thinking about that since we don't know what will go here, since they're not required to tell us what exactly the development will look like. I'm just trying to understand that a little bit more from where you're coming from.
I think that's a good point. I guess I just wanted to respond to that because, you know, as somebody said earlier, all development has to abide by certain design standards and so on. It's just in the case of the larger plan, the form and way that you meet the needs of the place are based on the proposal, as opposed to, like, in what I'm hearing is that these are going to be, you know, apartment complexes plopped down in the middle of the prime farmland. And so I don't know if that helps, but I guess I can't speak in a lot of detail to the answer to that question. It's a very good question, Caroline. I think that could be the case, but you know what? Right now, this land is zoned in the county. It isn't even part of the city. So that's where I also think that I've never, I don't know, the few times I've seen annexation and subdivision at the same time, this annexation was first because then it met the requirement of the city. I haven't seen a lot of annexation. We don't do it very much. We're going to be doing it a lot more now. So I'd like to understand the policy more. I'm surprised that it doesn't come to us. But anyway, sorry, that's more than you asked, Caroline. It's a great question. I'm not clear. I don't really know. And that makes me.
I can try to address that maybe from an investor in development or the developer's perspective a little bit. So my understanding is that they're going to meet the density requirements for neighborhood mixed use. The density doesn't concern me at all. I think we need density in this location. What concerns me is the type of density and the diversity of product and the form with which that density takes between commercial, parkland, open space, residential, both dense and not dense, and how that community takes shape. And when I'm looking at projects come across my desk right now, given the elevated cost of construction and the compression of rents, I'm seeing projects come across with yield on cost of 4.5%, 5%, meaning that development spreads right now across the country, and I believe in Missoula as well, are tight. And so what does that lead me to believe? That developers are going to push towards efficiency as much as they can. I don't want to be presumptuous. I don't know the plan. Nobody knows the plan. But when I'm drawing on information to try to understand what's possible to be built, my inclination is that they're going to tend towards efficiency, which means apartments and, you know, of course, abide by the construction permits and all the requirements that the city has to build, no doubt. But it's more difficult to build under form-based code. It's more difficult to build a lot of times mixed use. But those weren't the rules. Those weren't the rules at the time that application was submitted, is my understanding. And that's what I think we should hold them to. Does it mean I think there's a very high likelihood that the result won't be consistent with what we want under the, I'm going to call it the Mullen Master Plan. That's not what we're calling it now, but I can't remember how to pronounce the right name. And so that's where I come down. Am I disappointed? Extremely. Is it frustrating? Yes. But those weren't the rules when these guys started the process. Do I think they maybe could have been more accommodating and worked with Dover Coal and understood what the community wanted in that location? Yeah, maybe they'll do that. I don't know what's going to be built there. But so I guess that's, you know, that's my color on what's going on, and it's frustrating, but I'm going to support it.
Thanks,
that was really well said, Josh. Thank you for saying it that way. I appreciate it.
Sean, you're up.
So I don't know. I guess it's hard for me to feel like we're not in kind of this same rock and a hard place with this development out there. It kind of reminds me of the other subdivisions we've been presented in some way, that we're arguing over what the ideal is and the form, and yet these folks have come in before that. And now, you know, I hear from staff that, you know, city council had an option to stop like anything, and that seems like what should perhaps have been done under better governance, maybe, which doesn't help the housing policy at all. But I mean, I just don't know how to proceed on this, right? Like, I agree with Andy. I want development. We need development. But at the same time, I agree with Dave. And Josh, I think, maybe just made the best argument of all, as far as like where we sit. And I mean, I don't know how I'm going to vote on this, but I feel like Josh's argument was pretty sound. It's a lot harder. I have a lot less experience than Dave Loomis as far as like the finding of facts, and it's a lot more difficult for me to assess that out. I tend to weigh public comment and opinions more, and that's another place where I'm struggling, is I always hear these community members around these developments concerned about huge developments going up. And, you know, like, how do we weigh there and add that to this conversation and these votes? Like, how do we make that represented? I don't know how that happens. So I'm not adding anything here but my own personal confusion is what it seems like. So I don't know where I'm going to vote. I want to thank Josh again. I think that was a very articulate and well placed statement. And that's all I got.
Thanks, Sean. Micah, it's your turn.
Thanks. I want to thank Josh and Neva, because I'm torn between these two viewpoints as well. And I completely agree that it feels really difficult to be put in this position, looking at the growth policy, looking at all the documents that even predate the Subdivision plan. You know, this area was designated as a node, a place that's supposed to have a really high level of placemaking and value in the community. And I'm disappointed that we're in a position where I feel like I'm probably going to vote yes, because they are following the rules that were in place at the time. But we don't have any guarantee that it's going to produce the outcome that has been really designated in many ways for a long time for this area. And also the fact that that node extends beyond this into the next parcel to the north. And, you know, the way this parcel is built is going to affect how the neighboring parcel is built. So it really reduces the chance that we have the outcome that we were looking for. And yet it feels like we're not in a position to deny this request, or I don't feel like I'm in a position to deny it. So it's a really difficult position, and I have a feeling of kind of disappointment that the decisions that led us here make it hard for us to do that.
Thank you, Micah. That was well said. June.
Yeah, I actually had the same question, or similar as to Caroline's, which is, and I think Micah just articulated it as well, or kind of reinforce it. But because I'm relatively new, can someone explain or maybe prognosticate about what our ideal outcome would be? I mean, obviously we have no idea, and there's a lot of challenges, but this is another struggle where we're working towards some ideal with the realities of what today is, and we're very much in a transition period. And so I don't want to penalize the developers because, again, they did play by the rules. But what is our ideal? I don't really I'm having a hard time understanding what it would be in this particular area.
It's a great question, Tim. Anyone want to take a stab? Who might feel like, you know, that with the Mullen, if we get the Swetoopkan area plan, that this might be different, right? That's the idea. I think Tim's asking, how would it be different? I think it's a really good question.
I think the point is that we don't really know. And because the new zoning that they don't have yet on this property, which I'm still going to keep saying, because I'm really baffled by that we could approve something that doesn't meet the current zoning on the property. How can we do that? So to me, there's a whole process question, but the outcome, you know, I think the outcome would be more like the design of the, like, say, the transition between the 44 Ranch and this subdivision would be, they would still work to meet the unit goals and maybe sometime exceed, but it would be done in a way that matches the all the design things that are part of the form-based code, which is a lot of things about water and how some of the there's a ton of things in the form-based code about how they develop it and character place, but we don't really know we don't know what these people are envisioning. And the way the form-based code will work is that the developer would go in and work with the designers to figure out how to meet it and get there, and not necessarily even be limited by the number of units, but would try to, you know, meet the character descriptions that are laid out in the code. That's how I understand it working. Like that the difference is, as opposed to saying you can do X, Y, and Z uses on this property, it's more about how we develop those uses and what it looks like on the ground, and that it's not just cookie cutters added on. And I look at that map today, I'm like, geez, how much of this Mullen area plan or Subdivision plan have we already, you know, built on or approved? And this one is just kind of got me. It doesn't match what we've been talking about, in my view. But you guys vote if you want. It's 9 o'clock.
I'll take a shot at envisioning a community. I mean, it's a little hard to do, but I guess in my mind, I would see.
Go on.
I was going to say, you know, under the form-based code, a mixed use community, meaning a good mix of commercial and residential. Maybe it's, you know, residential above commercial. You've got local community services, restaurants, eating establishments, a diverse set of use types within the community versus 3-story garden style apartment buildings on the two far ends, right? And within the residential under form-based code, maybe you have some cottages, maybe you have apartments, maybe you have townhomes. And so you have a mix of product types. You have a mix of uses between commercial, non-commercial. You have open space sprinkled in certain ways that allows those different communities to connect in an optimal way, versus density maximization. And you still comply with the use type, right? And so in my mind, those could be two different types of scenarios. Under the Mullen Master Plan, one is going to prescribe a certain type of development, more form-based, mixed use, walkability, compact, diverse. What these guys are I guess forced to play by, the rules are forced, do not prescribe that. Fine. That, you know, those are the rules. But I guess those are the two different types of outcomes that I could envision. I don't, but maybe I'm wrong. I'd love to hear the developer speak to that a little bit. What are they thinking? What are, you know, maybe they don't know. I know they want flexibility in case the market changes, but I know that's a great answer all the time as well.
Yeah, I think those are two good answers to the question, which is a good one for the discussion, because I know a lot of us here tonight are concerned about that disconnect between what's being approved now and what, you know, would have been required under the Subdivision plan. But, you know, at the same time, this Subdivision plan is not what governs here. So if anyone else, if you do speak to that, if has any detail to add to that, please feel free. But
well, the B2-2 zoning designation allows for all of those diversity of uses. So since we are limited to thinking about it in that context, I feel like this is the best zoning designation. Of course, we don't know what's going to happen. That is really frustrating, but it's not like we're zoning it R1 and it's going to be a bunch of single family homes on 1 acre. We can still have this diversity that we're saying is the ideal development pattern.
We're not zoning
thanks,
it.
Caroline.
We're not zoning it.
Mike?
No, I understand, but once city council does, since we're talking about what the diversity.
Right, this is such a weird.
Micah, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I was just going to speak to Tung's question about, you know, what could this look like, and what I was basing my assessment of what it could look like, that was off of the staff report on page 8, where they're laying out what neighborhood mixed use and the node development overlay, things that predate the Subdivision plan for this land, which I don't think are, you know, they're guidelines, they're not, they're recommendations, they're not part of the zoning necessarily. But they talk about helping to give an identity to an individual or small groupings of neighborhoods and provide a visible and distinctive focal point by providing that mix of uses that Josh was talking about. And it really emphasizes pedestrian friendly and transit friendly, lots of things that could happen with this project, but are not necessarily going to happen. And it is hard. It's really kind of frustrating that we know so little about what this will look like. But those are the kind of things that if we were doing this to our best level of building this node into the community that was envisioned for it, that we would be looking at.
Thanks, Micah. Shane, the architect, maybe you can illuminate this.
Probably not. Yeah, I guess the only thing I would add, I think some folks have said it pretty well, like all the things that, most of the things that we would want out of the form-based code can happen here. But it's not required that they happen the way the form-based code. And the form-based code would require the mix of uses, and it would require different parking standards, and it would require that this parcel, for instance, is a community center parcel, and that would need to be broken into different mixes of the T3, T4, and T5 by percentage. And so each one of those sections requires a different type of building type within them. And there is some crossover, obviously. So, like that's getting to a desired outcome. Like that is our outcome. And yes, the B22 could get us there. It's just not going to be required that it does. That's my take on it. And I guess my last statement, I'm not a voting member, so my last statement is I agree with Dave's comment about the growth policy most here. And I thought that was really a good catch and pretty insightful.
Thanks, Shane. Carolyn, I want to go back to your comment. You indicated, I'm curious if you were interested in proposing an amendment to alter, you talked about the condition of annexation number 14. Were you thinking you'd like to amend, if you were thinking you'd like to amend those conditions of approval to reflect Abbey Road as an urban collector, this would be the place to do it. It would also affect the variance that we'll deal with next.
Yes, I think I would like to propose that as an amendment to the motion. So do I go ahead and just state that then, or? Like,
yeah.
Okay, great.
Well,
Okay. So
maybe you could describe for folks, so before we, maybe is there a second for the motion? Carolyn, why don't you describe what you're going to do first, and then make the motion, and we'll ask for a second, so everybody knows what you're.
I'm going to make a motion to amend in the conditions of approval, and I'm not sure where would be best to include this, but to remove from condition 14 that Abbey Road is an urban local street and have both George Elmer and Abbey Road be collector roads. I think those are the only two. So that would mean that as an urban collector, it would have to provide bike infrastructure as well, is my understanding of it, but I'm happy to be corrected.
Great. I think that works, Carolyn. Thank you. We'll have a discussion on it too if it's seconded. Is there a second for the motion? Need a second. Great. Motion is seconded. All right. Carolyn, do you have anything to add about why you want to do this, or what it's about?
Just thinking about whole complete street design and as a way to mitigate single occupancy vehicles leaving the development, providing safe bike infrastructure will both make a more vibrant street section and help with a variety of other goals.
Okay, thanks. Would anyone like to speak on the motion or otherwise? Andy.
If I could just say something, another way to put it might be, another way to put it might be not to designate it necessarily as a collector, but to suggest denying the variance and recommending that there be a bike lane included or something along those lines. I'm just trying to think out loud here.
That's fine with me. That's my main point, was just providing more bike infrastructure on that road. So whatever is the most efficient way to do that, I'll leave that to staff. And that recommendation seems fine with me.
Well, yeah, so Neva and Caroline, if you're both amenable to amending the amendment according to Dave's comment, I think that would be acceptable at this point.
Yes.
Yes, okay. So what Dave is saying, to maybe add additional, as you said, additional condition of approval that reflects the design that says we should add bike lanes, accommodate bike lanes on those two roads.
And so, but would that change the width of the road that is proposed? Sorry.
I think it would have to.
Okay.
But in this case, we're not at the variance yet, Dave. We're still in the original conditions of approval. So at this point, the additional condition, I think, would be just to ensure that those two
protected
roads,
bike infrastructure on Abbey Road.
Yep. Protected bike infrastructure on Abbey Road. Okay. Andy, do you have a comment here, or is that?
Yeah, I was wondering if we could see some illustrations of like I think I heard Abbey Lane was the street being discussed. And I guess is there some illustrations that Dave or maybe Emily could pull up and show us in greater scale back where those roads lead to, and also what kind of road section you're proposing to change to when you say protected bike lanes. I guess I'd like to see what's proposed and what Caroline's vision of that is and where that leads us to and from.
Thanks, great. That's a great request. Since it's kind of a new topic, yeah, I mean, Dave, do you think we could get a site plan up to just kind of look at the
I think
question here?
Emily, you have that at your fingertips, don't you?
Yeah, but I'll bring up the preliminary plat, and then if needed, I can bring up the road sections for it too.
And my vision for it was something more akin to the developer's illustration of George Elmer Drive. They provided a rendering of George Elmer and then some of the internal streets, I believe. So that's what I was thinking more when I say protected bike infrastructure.
We'll start with this and I'll zoom in, and then I'll, the other document is pretty big, so I'll try and open that. But just to zoom in, Abbey Lane is the one going horizontally here. And I'm wondering if maybe if you guys have a more detailed plan that you kind of have at the ready to share too.
Matt, can you try and share a section? I think he could probably pull it up pretty quick for you, Emily.
Cool.
I'm working on it right now.
So does Abbey Lane connect on the right?
Oh, sorry, I'll bring it up while he's working on that.
It's planned to extend to the property to the east, but we don't have any plans. I haven't seen any plans at all, any applications, any inklings of development to the east yet.
Right, yeah, so this is a vacant parcel right now, so it would end here at this moment.
Wasn't that the conservation easement or no?
No, that's farther to the south.
Okay. I guess, is there any aerial while we're waiting, where you guys have this in an aerial perspective of kind of the greater, kind of the Google imagery or something?
I've got this pulled up, and our exhibit kind of has that a little bit up there.
Take it away.
And again, the reason I was proposing this was based off of the transportation agency comments, specifically calling out Abbey Lane.
Yeah, so you can see on this exhibit, those protected bike lanes on George Elmer Drive. Can everybody see my screen?
No.
Stand by. Okay, how about now?
Not yet.
No.
There we go.
Here it's coming.
Perfect. So you can see kind of an aerial background on this image. Andy's comment about the conservation easement. You can see just a very sliver of that parcel to the southeast right here. This is the parcel to the east that Davis mentioned, that there are no development plans for that yet, but there could be in the future. So Abbey Lane will connect into that parcel. And then zooming in, you can see the protected bike lanes along George Elmer. There's a sidewalk and there's a bike lane. They're moved out from the curb line. Typically, you've seen those in the past where they're kind of sandwiched in between this parking lane and the travel lane. And so this gets them out of there. And that's what Caroline means by protected. And so Abbey Lane, primary east-west roadway, she proposes adding those to Abbey Lane.
All right. Okay. Does anyone have more questions on this before we go for a vote? Anyone opposed to go into a vote on this?
We need to clarify a width on the bike lane. Sorry, I don't mean to get into something that we don't need to, but
let me pull up those sections. Give me 1 second here.
it looks like there's 6 feet on your other sections.
Yeah, that's correct. I can pull it up and get a visual here. So what you see is the section for an urban collector road with parking lane, travel lane, 6-foot bike lane, 6-foot sidewalk. The urban local streets as proposed were 64-foot right of way with just 5-foot sidewalk.
So the urban local, this is what it currently is recommended at?
This is the current proposal for Abbey Lane.
And do you have what?
Okay. And so the variance will bring it to this standard.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'm supportive of the revised amendment to accommodate bike lanes at this point. I think I might vote differently on the variance if it's proposed differently. I mean, I think the urban local, we want to keep streets as narrow as possible for a lot of different reasons. And the urban local street, if it's designed to accommodate bike lanes, I think is wide enough that would go in the boulevard space. So that's my thinking on this. Give you all a second to mull this over.
So I guess just to clarify, so the motion would be modified or is proposed and seconded to be modified to include protected bike lanes, which would include 6-foot protected bike lanes. And it was the intent on both sides of the street.
Yes, I guess so. I think that's best practice, but I don't fully know. Neva, do you have thoughts as the seconder?
Well, I guess that's my thought too, but so so these side roads that aren't really part of the build grant, we don't know whether they'll extend or not, right? Outside this project, at least theoretically. Right? We don't, I mean, we would hope so, but because the project isn't, well, I don't know. Anyway, I'm fine with it both sides. I think that makes sense. It looks kind of like a football field a little bit. Let's call the question.
And just quickly to clarify, so this will modify condition number 13. I'm not sure how it would be structured yet, but potentially Abbey Lane would be removed. I'm sorry, condition number 14. Potentially Abbey Lane would be removed from that, or a sentence could be added that that there would be 6-foot protected bike lanes on both sides of Abbey Lane. So anyway, I can worry about the verbiage or the structure of it.
Yeah. I forgot about the protected bike lane. I'm not gonna be supportive of it. It seems like a big thing to add at the last second. You know, it's gone through so much, and you know, it's still a low traffic street in my mind. Aaron was pointing out that it could potentially, depending on how building happens, be up to 1,700 or 3,000 cars per day, but it sounds like a lot to add kind of at this point to me. So,
But if we don't have it, what happens when you do extend Abbey Road to the east, and then it becomes the norm that there's no bike lane?
well, there's a bike plan that, that's what the planning in the whole area is around, and staff, I trust staff have, done their best to match this to the plans in place. And Aaron was pointing out a potentiality that might occur. I think it was a decent point. But at the end of the day, we're still talking about a neighborhood street that's going to have a 7-foot wide boulevard. And, in my mind, I think I'm not overly concerned about the bikeability or walkability. Dave, were you going to add?
I am, and I'm concerned about what the precedent Abbey Road sets for the road that goes east. So I'll be supporting the motion to go both ways, but all good. We can vote differently.
Sounds good. Okay. So with that, all in favor of the motion as presented by Dave, please say aye.
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 Oh boy. We're gonna have to go roll call.
Can I clarify, are we voting on an amendment condition, or are we voting on, we're voting on the amendment to strike 13 and add 14? Is that correct? Is that?
Yep, that's correct, Andy. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, Donna or Heather, could we have a roll call on the vote here on the amendment?
Okay, are we ready for the vote?
Okay, we're ready for the vote.
Okay, Neva Hassanen.
Aye.
Neva Hassanen votes yes. Toon Pham.
Aye.
Toon Pham votes aye. Josh Schrader.
Aye.
Josh Schrader votes aye. Andy Mefford.
No.
Andy Mefford votes no. Sean McCoy.
Sean?
Sean?
Did you lose your
Thumbs
audio,
up or
Sean?
thumbs down? Thumbs down. Sean McCoy votes no. Dave Loomis.
Yes.
Dave Loomis votes yes. Micah Sewell.
Yes.
Micah Sewell votes yes. Caroline Lauer.
Yes.
Caroline Lauer votes yes. Vince Caristo.
No.
Vince Caristo votes no. The tally is 6 ayes, 3 noes. The motion carries. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so we're back to the original motion. Heather, Donna, could we get that back on the screen? This is the point of our discussion here. I think we heard good arguments on both sides here. I think for me, I feel I've expressed in prior meetings that just consternation with zombie subdivisions, or I guess this is a little different, but everything, I concur with all that, but I'm at the same time, I'm a little bit more at peace with it at this point, for the fact that understanding that we're likely, with the Subdivision plan or not, like there's going to be apartments here, and they might look a little different, they might function a little bit better, in all the ways that we delineated in the Subdivision plan. But at the end of the day, there are going to be a lot of housing here. There's likely going to be apartments, and it doesn't seem so far off from what we could expect to see here. And I think that's a good thing. We need a mix of housing in the community, and high density housing helps meet transportation goals, helps preserve lands further out. So I'm going to be supporting the motion. Would anyone like to speak again on this motion before? Anyone opposed to a vote on the original motion?
Would you like me to bring it back up on the screen?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, I thought that was already done. Okay. Down here. Okay, seeing no objections to go on a vote, we'll do a roll call vote again. Donna, could you do a roll call vote for us, please?
Okay, Neva Hassanen.
No.
Neva Hassanen votes no. Toon Pham.
Yes.
Toon Pham votes yes. Josh Schrader.
Yes.
Josh Schrader votes yes. Andy Mefford.
Yes.
Andy Mefford votes yes. Sean McCoy.
No.
Sean McCoy votes no. Dave Loomis.
No.
Dave Loomis votes no. Micah Sewell.
Yes.
Micah Sewell votes yes. Caroline Lauer.
Yes.
Caroline Lauer votes yes. Vince Caristo.
Yes.
Vince Caristo votes yes. Mr. Chair, it carries 6-3. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Emily, could you bring up the amendments? And I think maybe if they are the same as what you're proposing tonight in your presentation, I think the way it was presented in the staff report as a list might be easier for us to comprehend all at once.
Yeah, I'll get that up right now.
Thank you. Okay, Dave, how would you recommend dealing with, I think we should deal with the amended, the variances that pertain to Abbey Road first. So would you, I think you said earlier you'd recommend denying the variance, a motion to not deny the variance first?
Yeah, I think specifically with Abbey Road, if there are 6-foot protected bike lanes included, they would not fit within the proposed 64-foot right-of-way. And so I think your only recourse is to deny the variance for that one specific road.
Right, but I think the variance was combined with multiple roads. We'll see when it comes up on the
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, that one variance with Abbey Lane in it
Can you scroll up, Emily, to the variances?
Oh, well, I can bring.
Or, yeah, why don't you bring the
Number
variance
3.
up?
Here are the variances, and then I can go back to the staff report for the.
Great.
But yeah, the one containing Abbey Lane is combined with Winchester, Briar, and Remington.
So someone could, I'm just throwing this out there for the sake of discussion, someone could move to approve variance request number 3 for reducing right-of-way for urban local streets to allow 64-foot rights-of-way for Winchester Drive, Briarway, Remington Drive, but not Abbey Lane.
Right. I think that's the way to go. And would we specify the reason? We could specify the reason, in order to provide space for protected bike lanes on both sides of Abbey Lane.
Yes.
Okay. Great. Well, Caroline or someone else, would you maybe like to make that motion?
Yeah, I'm happy to do so. Okay, so I move to approve the variance request for section 3-020 table 2A, which requires a minimum 80-foot right-of-way for urban local street to allow 64 rights-of-way for Winchester Drive, Briarway, and Remington Drive, but not Abbey Lane due to the amended condition of 6-foot bike lanes on both sides. Did I do it?
Yes. Did you protected? It was protected in there? I'm sorry.
Right. Due to protect 6-foot protected bike lanes on Abbey Lane on both sides.
That's important because it has a design feature that requires more width. So great. Is there a second for that motion?
Excuse me, Vince, didn't we also want to include the one above it for the approval for the Old Ranch Road? Kind of combine them together.
Thanks, Donna, for the point.
All the variances?
I think we'll take this one first because we already had an amendment to the original motion that made this motion need to be amended. Afterwards, I think we should take all the other variances together at once, unless there's an objection. So that's the reason why we're not doing both at the same time here, Donna. Does that Yeah. So is there a second for Caroline's motion, which was the second portion of what's on the screen here? And as I mentioned.
I second it.
Okay, 2 seconds. Okay. Well, we just had a discussion on this, given the amendment to the original motion that passed. I think Caroline's motion makes sense. It just follows that through to this variance to accommodate the protected bike lanes on both sides. I'll still vote the same way. Does anyone want to speak for or have anything to say? Okay. Seeing none.
Actually, can I ask a really quick question? So remind me again why they want to narrow it. I mean, I'm in favor of reducing impervious surfaces, so overall, but remind me again why they want to narrow it. I mean, like Caroline said, we have a standard. What's the
Do you mean generally, Neva, in the variances?
All these ones are narrowing it.
Yeah, okay. Great.
And go slower.
Dave, could you address that?
To go slower? I like that. Okay.
I don't know if there's a general answer, but maybe you could address that.
I think there are a few different reasons. Number one, it's not necessary given the anticipated traffic volumes. And so less area in right of way is more area in lots that can be developed for one reason.
Are there sidewalks?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. That's okay.
Boulevards along the streets, sidewalks.
I'm good.
Okay. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Oh, okay, we'll have to do a roll call. I thought it was gonna be easy. Donna, could we do a roll call vote on this amendment, please?
Okay, this is for the amendment to strike the Abbey Lane. Okay. Neva Hassanen.
Aye.
Neva Hassanen votes yes. Toon Pham.
Yes.
Toon Pham votes yes. Josh Schrader.
Yes.
Josh Schrader votes yes. Andy Mefford.
No.
Andy Mefford votes no. Sean McCoy.
No.
Sean McCoy votes no. Dave Loomis.
Yes.
Dave Loomis votes yes. Micah Sewell.
Yes.
Micah Sewell votes yes. Caroline Lauer.
Yes.
Caroline Lauer votes yes. Vince Caristo.
No.
Vince Caristo votes no. 6-3, the motion carries.
Thank you, Donna. Okay, we have some additional variances to consider. I think there were at least 5 others. Emily, if you could put them up on the screen for us.
I think we need to go back to that first one on the page. Wait.
I can start for one. I can also, I'm trying to think if I have a list where we can look at them all at once. I think this might be the best way to go through them. But just let me know where you want to start.
So you want us to vote on each one individually?
There were some that were coupled together, but variance 1 was sitting out by itself, so I think we ought to do this. And then now variance number 2 is kind of solo now too, since we broke out number 3. So we'll
Okay, sure.
we roll with it.
Great. Let's just go with variance number 1, the way it's on the screen. Would anyone like to make the motion that's presented on the screen for a variance on George Elmer Drive?
I would make the motion for approval of the variance request from section 3-020 table 2A, which requires a minimum 90-foot right-of-way for an urban collector with parking to allow an 80-foot right-of-way for George Elmer Drive.
Okay, thanks, Andy. Micah, did I see
Yep,
a willingness to second? Okay, Micah seconds. Is anyone opposed to a vote? Okay. All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed?
Nay.
The motion passes.
That was 1 nay.
That was 1 nay, Donna.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay, on to the next.
So the next would be number 2.
Okay, next. Would someone please make a motion for variance number 2?
I'll make a motion for approval of a variance request from section 3-020, table 2A. I guess is that point 2A or 2A? It was one of the, I don't have it in front of me, but it is a little confusing, but I'll say 2A, which requires a minimum 80-foot right-of-way for an urban local street to allow a 64-foot right-of-way for Old Ranch Road.
Thank you, Andy. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Seconded by Caroline. Okay, all in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 All opposed? Okay, none opposed. The motion passes. Okay, flip to variance 4, Emily.
Yep, and these could probably be combined. The only change in the language is lot 1 and lot 6.
Okay, great. Well, let's do both of them together then. So, would someone please make a motion to approve both of the variances 4 and 5 on the screen?
I move to approve the variance request from section 3-030.2.A2 to allow a block length longer than 480 feet on lot 1 and lot 6.
Great. Thank you, Micah. Is there a second? Neva seconds?
Oh, no, I have
No.
a question. Sorry, I'm not seconding.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay. Great. Neva, you have a question?
Yeah, so what is remind me, I'm sorry, these meetings go so long, I forget the early stuff. So the current block length normally would be what? And how much longer than 480 feet are we allowing?
I can go back. So 480 feet is the maximum. On lot 1, it's approximately 609 feet. And then on lot 6, it's 627 feet. And as Dave mentioned before, there's these easements. They're public access easements for pedestrian access.
Okay, thanks.
And those are conditions of approval, right, Emily?
Yeah, that seems important to me as a condition because I don't know why, but it's just a notion maybe, like the length, but it does seem odd when you go places and the length of blocks really varies, and I think that might be a design issue. So this is good. I like this. Thanks.
I had one point of clarification on that. It says it is a public access easement, I believe. There is not shown to be any infrastructure or facilities. It's strictly just an easement. Question mark.
That's true.
Okay.
So does that mean that the city would have to find funding somehow to build that path out?
It could be required as under the building permit process, potentially.
Okay.
Could we?
Yeah, at this moment right now, it's more the legal mechanism to get that.
Could we require it as part of this variance? If they want this variance, then can they build the path?
We certainly consider that at the staff level, whether to make that a requirement, and chose not to. On the southern one, I don't know if you can show that image again.
Stay on this page.
Sorry. So where the approximately 627 feet is on the southern lot, you can see there's a dashed line running east to west. That's an easement right there that runs along the south boundary and then actually goes up all the way along the west side of the property. And so I don't know if a road is going to go in there at some point. I don't know what's going to happen with that easement, but we thought about, well, should they install a sidewalk or something like that? But then would it conflict with, potential future travel route? And then we also just don't know how these lots are going to be designed, how they're going to be built. So I guess we at the staff level just ended up not requiring anything other than the easement itself so that it could be developed at some point in the future. And that's where we ended up.
Well, can I offer a friendly amendment to the variance?
Yes.
I would like to see the, make a condition of approval that the developer not only provide public access, but provide a path that will provide access, because that part of the point of having blocks sort of a similar length is, you know, it provides that continuity and predictability, as Dave was mentioning earlier. I don't see why that wouldn't be a condition of approval for this variance.
So Dave, we've already approved the conditions of approval, right? I'm just trying to figure out how we can make this,
Can I make
get the intent through here, but also be constructive. So Dave, we've already, is it possible to add to the condition?
Okay.
It is possible. I believe it is possible to, let's say, just I'm speaking theoretically, to approve the variance, but when approving the variance, add a condition of approval that, for example, a 6 foot wide gravel surface path is built, or some other specification. I just threw that out there. I don't know what it should be.
Okay.
The answer is yes. I think you can do that.
Great, great. So Neva, yeah, the amendment is
I mean,
doable.
are other people interested in doing that, or am I just the only one? Because it seems to me it makes sense, but
I would support it as long as it was doable functionally. I mean, I agree with the sentiment, and I also, you know, hate to see I think block length standards are important, and this is a mitigation that, you know, kind of fixes it, but not really in my mind. You know, these paths are not the same as a city street in terms of walkability and what you'd let a 5-year-old, you know, go through and whatnot. So I would support it.
Andy's
I would second it. I'll second it.
Andy's got some.
Andy, sorry.
I guess we're being a point of discussion about it. This point, I would not be in supportive of requiring a path, because it's sort of a path to nowhere. It's sort of a path on the south end of people's backyards. It's sort of on my maybe soapbox, if you will, that I made the comment earlier. We talk about good planning and stuff. What I look at is it seems really a swing and a miss to some degree that there wasn't coordination in Remington Flats when you've got an easement laying on the southern boundary of the property, and then you go give up another easement that's really going to be highly restrictive on that handle or panhandle of that lot 6, because between the road of Remington Drive and the big platted easement, you know, it's limiting what you can probably do. At best, probably parking lots maybe or something. You're not going to be able to have buildings or other things. So it's sort of unfortunate in the grand scheme that Remington Drive winds up where it does to not coordinate to the Remington Flats proposed next door. It's kind of a waste of space, seems like. But I don't think, you know, it's kind of a placeholder. I mean, it's kind of just an unfortunate rule to have to come up with this workaround to throw a trail in the middle of a block, and I've seen it done in the past. But I think I wouldn't be supportive of requiring a pathway without knowing the site plans that could be developed on lot 1 and 6. It'll be an encumbrance they'll have to work around, but strictly requiring a path to the sort of nowhere land right now, it doesn't make sense to me. As Dave mentioned, it could be imposed at building permit times and other things. So that would be my argument against, I guess, approving that.
I'm willing to withdraw my motion. Let's wrap this up. It's getting late.
Motion's been made and seconded. We'll have to vote on it. So.
All right.
Okay.
Who seconded that?
I seconded that.
Thanks, Vince.
Okay, so Donna, could we do a roll call vote on the amendment?
Certainly. Neva Hassanen.
Aye.
Neva Hassanen votes yes. Toon Pham.
No.
Toon Pham votes no. Josh Schrader.
Yes.
Josh Schrader votes yes. Andy Mefford.
No.
Andy Mefford votes no. Sean McCoy.
No.
Sean McCoy votes no. Dave Loomis.
No.
Dave Loomis votes no. Micah Sewell.
No.
Micah Sewell votes no. Caroline Lauer.
No.
Caroline Lauer votes no. Vince Caristo.
Yes.
Vince Caristo votes yes. The motion fails 6-3.
Thank you very much.
Okay, can we clarify that, please, just for the sake of record keeping? So did the planning board just vote to deny variances 4 and 5?
No, it was just on the
Motion.
on the amendment.
Thank you.
So we can bring back the motion for variances 4 and 5.
Yeah.
I don't think I got a second.
I don't think you have to read them all out necessarily. I'll second them.
Okay, so Micah had made the motion, and I can't remember if there was a second either, but
I'll
if there
second.
wasn't, Neva seconds it. Okay. Great. Donna, could we have a roll call vote on these two motions?
Okay, variances 4 and 5. Neva Hassanen.
No.
Neva Hassanen votes no. Toon Pham.
Yes.
Toon Pham votes yes. Josh Schrader.
Yes.
Josh Schrader votes yes. Andy Mefford.
Yes.
Andy Mefford votes yes. Sean McCoy.
Yay.
Sean, I'm sorry, is that an A?
No.
No. Sean McCoy votes no. Dave Loomis.
Yes.
Dave Loomis votes yes. Micah Sewell.
Yes.
Micah Sewell votes yes. Caroline Lauer.
Yes.
Caroline Lauer votes yes. Vince Caristo.
Yes.
Vince Caristo votes yes. The motion carries 7-2.
All right, thank you very much. Is there at least one more? Okay. Okay, there's one more, variant 6, which deals with Pius Drive. Would someone like to make the motion that's on the screen?
I'll make a.
Oh, go ahead.
I'll make a motion to approve the variance request from section 3-020.3.h2, which requires dedication of right-of-way on abutting existing streets to meet the requirements of table .2a to allow a 54-foot right-of-way to be maintained on Pius Way.
Okay, thank you, Caroline. Neva, were you looking to second this? No, okay. Is there a second?
Sure.
Neva seconds, okay. Great, we've got a motion and a second. Give a moment in case there are last thoughts. Donna, could we have a roll call vote, please?
Certainly, Neva Hassanen.
Oh, yeah.
Neva Hassanen votes yes. Toon Pham.
Yes.
Toon Pham votes yes. Josh Schrader.
Yes.
Josh Schrader votes yes. Andy Mefford.
Yes.
Andy Mefford votes yes. Sean McCoy.
No.
Sean McCoy votes no. Dave Loomis.
Yes.
Dave Loomis votes yes. Micah Sewell.
Yes.
Micah Sewell votes yes. Caroline Lauer.
Yes.
Caroline Lauer votes yes. Vince Caristo.
Yes.
Vince Caristo votes yes. Motion carries 8-1.
Thank you very much, Donna. Okay, is that all the variances we've approved? We've dealt with the subdivision.
We did that. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that concludes the public hearing on the McNett Flats. Thank you very much, Emily and Dave, for the great presentation and answering all our questions. And Matt and Cody and Dave and others, thank you for joining us and being available through the duration of the discussion. It's been great to have you. So.
Thanks, Vince. Thank you all for your time. We appreciate it.
Great, thank you. Okay, committee reports. Has there been a TPCC meeting or a Growth Policy Commission meeting since the time we've last met?
No, the Urban Growth Commission meetings have been canceled until further notice.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Then moving on to the next item, which is, so we don't have any old business or new business. Well, unless anyone, would like to propose new business, we can move on to comments from planning board members. So I know it's getting late here, but this is the time to express whatever's on your mind about planning issues or otherwise. So please feel free.
I just had a kind of a general question, and I apologize if it's a bit of a newbie question here, but we talk a lot about like utilities and water and all that kind of stuff. In this day and age, what is our policy around broadband access, especially in these new developments? Is that even a consideration these days, or is that primarily a private thing?
Dave, I don't know. I mean, planning board members, feel free to jump in, but Dave as well, if you have anything, please do.
No, I don't have the sense of it. I don't know.
I mean, my sense is that we talk about sewer, water, and those types of things because they're public utilities, whereas phone and internet and other things like that, cable TV, are not.
That'd be my guess.
Yeah, I imagine they use the same space, the utility easement corridors, but I don't know how that's negotiated either.
Typically in that process, developers submit comments to agencies. They may receive comments, but it's sort of up on their own due diligence to go bring those infrastructure in as they see fit for the lots they're going to serve. You know, if it's a technology project, they may have a different expectation than a 5-acre residential subdivision on 20 acres. You know, they're maybe looking for phone or cable, and they have, you know, they go coordinate that activity and pay for it. A lot of times it's joint trenched with, you know, power or gas.
Thank you.
I had a conversation with Jordan Hess recently. He's the chair of the Land Use and Planning Committee in City Council, and we talked about ways to have some more cross communication between land use and planning and the planning board. It might take the form of a joint meeting of some kind, or it might be something else, but yeah, so that's something that's coming down the pike that I think we've talked about a lot at the time that since I've been here, how we can convey as a planning board some of the issues and things that come up here to the commissioners and the city council. And so Jordan is working on setting something up. So hopefully we'll see something come in the coming months. That's all. Thought I'd give that update. Would anyone else like to share anything? Shane. And then Mike.
Yeah, maybe just wanted to, I know that a lot of folks expressed some frustration today with this zoning thing. And I guess I maybe just wanted to reiterate that it feels like we were cut out of a zoning change by the city themselves through this annexation process. And, you know, it wasn't the developer's fault in this instance, but it does feel like we were kind of overlooked in some way. And I wanted to get on record that it just didn't seem quite right to me. So.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, Shane. I mean, I think it'd be something we bring up with city council. It certainly is a rezoning that happens. We see every other rezone, right? Why not for annexations? Sure, there's a reason, but.
And why wasn't it rezoned to something that they knew was coming down the pipeline with the form-based code?
Yeah. Micah?
Yeah, I wanted to comment on, I went to the county commissioners meeting because I was curious about the process of where things go when they leave us. So they were talking about the O'Keefe Ranch Estates, which was my first planning board meeting on January 5th. And I just wanted to note that they approved it unanimously, and that there was a lawyer from the county there who stated that zoning requests cannot be denied based solely on growth policy documents. That's a state law that's in place. That's not information that we had, I think, when we were talking, and that would have, I think, really affected our discussion. So I'm glad to hear that there's, you know, that Vince, you've reached out like to make connections. And I'm just curious if there's ever ways where we hear about, you know, where our decisions go, what the initial outcomes are after they leave us. Because I'm sure that they often are not doing what we recommend, but we don't necessarily follow up on that.
Thanks, Mike. Anita?
I'll pass. I'm good.
Karen. Karen has arrived.
I've been here the whole time.
You've been paying close attention the whole time. Clearly.
So to follow up on, who is that, Micah that just spoke? We used to produce a memo that I don't think was, I'm not sure anyone ever paid much attention to it, but we could go back to doing it if people are interested. We used to produce a memo that came out kind of on the off week. Can't remember if it was twice a month or once a month, where we'd kind of report out what happened with items that had come to planning board, what had happened afterwards in the governing body. And we can go back to doing that if that's something of interest to the planning board.
Yeah, I'd actually be interested in that, because what Micah just said was that it was denied because it wasn't, or they rejected our recommendation because it couldn't, the zoning request couldn't be denied just based on the growth policy, excuse me. But there was no zoning. It wasn't.
They were proposing zoning.
Change.
They were proposing zoning, and there was, I mean, there was substantial discussion, as I understand it, about how to think about compliance. So I think they got into that discussion, and then the point that John Hart, the county attorney from the county attorney's office, raised is you cannot base a land use decision solely on something not complying with the growth policy.
Any land use decision, not just subdivision, any land use.
Subdivision, zoning, it
Okay.
can't be based solely on a growth policy argument.
Thanks.
You're essentially not supposed to use a growth policy as zoning.
But you have to do it every 5 years, so don't forget that.
You have to review it every 5 years.
Okay.
Because Karen, the idea is there's all these other criteria, right, that it has to meet.
Yeah, I mean,
only one.
Compliance with the growth policy is a preeminent. It's one of the higher level review criteria. But on the flip side, the legislature's also said you can't make your decision solely to deny based on that.
Great, that's really good to keep in mind as we all get, better at what we do here to be more clear with the reasoning for decisions.
Hey, Karen,
when
that memo comes back, will it include that kind of language on just the reasoning, or such as John's comments?
I think what we typically did was a pretty brief summary, and then I think if people wanted to follow up, we can do that. I mean, we don't have the time to write a memo on every final action. I mean, the final record is available and the final decision is available if people want to delve into the details. And certainly we could have staff come back if you wanted to mull over something.
It's just good learning for us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sean.
I think Sean had his hand up.
Yeah, Sean.
Thanks, Tom. I just wanted to thank everybody. I think this board is awesome, and the questions that you guys all ask are just so spot on. They always take my questions before I even get to them. So I just wanted to thank everybody for their participation. As hard as these things are, I enjoy listening to all of you. I often feel like I'm being pulled back and forth, but just want to thank everybody. It's just good working with y'all.
You're muted, Vince.
Vince, you're still muted.
I don't know what you heard or didn't say. I said, thank you all for a good meeting. I concur with Sean. It's been good discussion tonight, so we can adjourn the meeting. So
yeah, thank you
good
guys.
night.
Take care.